anime autopsy here, and I need you to stop saying Oda just figured it out along the way. No, absolutely not. Oda did not stumble into a decent ending after 27 years of vibes and caffeine. He cheated time. He sat down before Chapter 1, outlined the end of One Piece, circled the Void Century, Joy Boy and the treasure itself, and then spent decades drip-feeding us foreshadowing while we clapped and called it coincidence. Listen to me, this is not a normal author problem. Most long-running manga barely know what's happening next year, never mind the final panel. Oda has literally said he decided that final image before serialization and has been steering the ship toward it ever since. So when people in the community post a panel from East Blue next to Egghead and go, "There's no way he planned that from the beginning," I need you to understand that sentence is the whole reason this video exists. Because here's the thing. In this story, the ending, the Void Century, Joy Boy, the ancient weapons, the will of D, even the weird geometry of the Grand Line itself are not random lore sprinkles. They are the spine. They were planned. They were intentionally seeded in those early chapters through visual motifs, throwaway lines, and world-building rules that only start making sense when you've marinated in 1,000 plus chapters and realized you've been the pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast while Oda was painting the Sistine Chapel. You know the famous examples the fans always bring up. Laboon at Reverse Mountain, that gag whale, paying off hundreds of chapters later with Brook's tragedy, Skypiea's empty adventure secretly pointing straight at Luffy's final destination, and the sun god imagery of Nika, Alabasta casually dropping Pluton, while the series pretends ancient weapons are side quests. The D-Clan's goofy middle initial eventually standing across from Imu, the literal shadow monarch of the world. We're going to use all of that, but not as isolated Easter eggs. We need to connect them into one coherent outline Oda has been following from day one. So here's what this video is actually doing. First, I'm going to zoom out and show you the broad blueprint. How Oda pre-wrote the endgame, the core mysteries, and the structure of the seas. Then we move into character foreshadowing. The way Straw Hat dreams, backstories, and even goofy designs are ticking time bombs. After that, world-building seeds. Poneglyphs, D, Reverie, the Grand Line as a 27-year puzzle box. And we drill down into the really insane stuff. Visual echoes, dialogue fragments, cover stories, SBS jokes that are not jokes. This is not a sin, by the way. Retrofitting is normal. Coincidence is normal. But what we're doing here is proving something different. That Oda wrote the ending backwards and hid the roadmap in plain sight. Once you see how tight the foreshadowing net actually is, you can't unsee it. And somewhere in those early chapters there is one panel that quietly spoils the entire structure of the world and the final conflict. You've probably flipped past it a dozen times. We'll get there. Just not yet. So let's talk about the day Oda basically spoiled his own manga to himself. In multiple interviews, he said two things that the community loves to quote and then somehow ignore. 1. He decided the ending of One Piece before serialization. Not the vibe of the ending. The ending. 2. He had the final panel in his head and has been steering the ship toward that single image for decades. I need you to really sit with that. Because once you accept it, half the Oda is freestyling discourse just evaporates. He's also said the core mysteries were locked in early. What the One Piece actually is, what happened in the Void Century, who Joy Boy was, why the world government fears the name. Those weren't late game shower thoughts. Those were on the whiteboard before Chapter 1. In SBS and interviews, he keeps repeating versions of the same point. The Void Century, the D, ancient weapons, Laugh Tale. These are not things he's still figuring out. They're things he's slowly revealing. Here's the thing. That isn't normal weekly serialization behavior. That's reverse outlining. Most authors outline forward, start, middle, end, prey. Oda starts at the finish line, nails down the last page, the last emotional beat, then reverse engineers the route. He knows where the plane has to land, so every island, every faction, every gag is secretly a structural support for that landing. The foreshadowing isn't him guessing his own future decisions. It's him drip-feeding a decision that already exists. So when he introduces Poneglyphs, the Will of D, and the idea of a forgotten century before chapter 200, that's not a fun mystery box experiment. That's load-bearing architecture. These are what I'm calling load-bearing mysteries. Questions you cannot afford to improvise if your story is going to stick the landing. What is the One Piece? Add in that 100 years. Why is a single initial treated as a war crime? If you wing those, the entire reread collapses. And notice how the themes line up. Freedom versus control. Inherited will. The sea is a literal ocean and a metaphor for history. This is not a sin. This is not just vibes. This is structural. Joy Boy's failure, the erased kingdom, the ancient weapons, Luffy punching celestial dragons and gods in the face. These aren't disconnected cool moments. They're all orbiting the same pre-written answer about who gets to control the past and who gets to rewrite the future. Now yes, some details clearly changed. Character designs evolved, certain arcs ballooned, some reveals got delayed. This is normal. This is fine. But the skeleton, the D-Clan, Laugh Tale, the lie at the heart of the world government, that had to be fixed. That's the category of information we're tracking in this video. Not whether Oda always knew what Sanji's eyebrows would do, but whether he always knew why the world was split and what was waiting at the end of the map. We need to stop acting like this man is just freestyling with a pen. He built a 27-year runway for one landing. That's not improv. That's obsession. And over the next sections, I'm going to start pulling receipts. How the Grand Line's weird belt structure, the four blues, and the entire Poneglyph system are already reverse engineered from the final destination. Because if you look closely, even the very first world map in East Blue is wrong in a very specific, very intentional way. Wrong in a way that only makes sense if Oda already knew what Laugh Tale was, where it sat, and why the journey had to be funneled down one impossible line. We're going to zoom in on that next. So when that first world map drops and we're told 4 blues, 1 giant red continent and a single murder ocean wrapped around the equator, I need you to pause and actually look at that. That is an absurd planet. That is not, I doodled a fantasy globe on a napkin. That is, I engineered a maze. 4 seas quarantined by a stone wall and a death ring is already screaming, this world was built to hide something. Because here's the thing. From chapter 1, the Grand Line is presented as one route, the most dangerous sea in the world, the one path to the Pirate King's treasure. That framing is doing double duty. In story, it's hype. Out of story, it's the author quietly telling you, there is a literal end point. There is a finish line where all the threads, treasure, history, Joy Boy, One Piece have to stack on the same physical square of the board. That final island at the end of the Grand Line, before it even has a name, is not a vague dream. It's a structural necessity. If Oda already knows that the truth of the Void Century, the ancient weapons, and the One Piece itself are one answer, he needs a single tile on the map where that answer lives. Do you really think mysterious final island at the end of the deadliest sea was a placeholder? No, that's the thesis statement of the whole plot wearing a fake mustache. Now watch how he forces you toward it. The log pose is sold to us as a quirky navigation gadget. Fun game mechanic. Island roulette. But functionally, it's a narrative funnel. It says, you cannot free roam this ocean. You're on rails. You will pass through specific arcs in specific orders because the story needs you to hit certain information checkpoints before you're allowed to approach the truth. Reverse mountain, the calm belt, the impossibility of normal navigation, this is not flavor. This is infrastructure. Reverse mounting gives you a single legal entrance. The calm belt, full of sea kings and windless water, walls off the Grand Line from casual military control. That's why the world government can't just park a battleship next to every problem island tied to the Void Century. The map itself is the excuse for why Ohara can exist long enough to study Poneglyphs, why Alabaster can hide Pluton, why Fishman Island can sit under a prophecy time bomb without getting nuked on day one. And once you accept that, The road poneglyph system stops being shocking and starts being inevitable. Of course, the final island can only be reached after visiting specific other islands. The whole ocean has been telegraphing a multi-step key system since East Blue. Loguetown is literally branded as the beginning and end of the Grand Line, execution site of the last guy who reached the truth, and the ceremonial starting line of the pirate era. That's an information gate wearing a town skin. Listen to me. The community keeps treating these as separate categories, world building over here, mystery over there. This is not a sin, this is normal, but it misses the intentional design. When you stack the map, the log poses, the choke points, and the one last island concept, the planet stops reading as a random fantasy setting and starts reading as a locked vault. A vault someone built to bury exactly 1 century of history. And the second you add poneglyphs and ancient weapons onto that blueprint, which we need to do next, the whole thing stops being a coincidence and turns into a 27-year puzzle box Oda has been slowly, methodically unlocking in front of you. So when Oda drops poneglyphs in Alabasta, that's not flavor text. That's the user interface for the main mystery. We meet them as these indestructible stone tablets buried under a kingdom in crisis. The world government is terrified of them. Crocodile is hunting them. And the one person who can read them, Nico Robin, whose entire childhood was literally a war crime about this script. From the second she steps into the story, her job class is Translator of Forbidden History. That is not an accident in year 5. That is the operating system. Here's the thing. If you're an author and you want to hide an 800-year-old genocide, you have a massive writing problem. How do you drip out the truth across dozens of arcs without an exposition NPC just dumping a Wikipedia article on you in chapter 30? Oda's solution is brutally efficient. He turns history into a collectible. You can't burn it, you can't censor it, you can only scatter it and kill the people who can read it. That's not just world building, that's a delivery mechanism. And then you look at the categories. Historical poneglyphs that record what happened, weapon poneglyphs that describe Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus. Road poneglyphs that don't even tell you lore, they tell you coordinates. That taxonomy is too clean, too functional. It solves too many pacing and structure problems at once to be something he just figured out in a meeting after Alabasta. This reads as pre-writing. The menu was printed before the restaurant opened. Remember what the Alabasta stone actually says. Robin lies to Crocodile about an ancient weapon, but the tablet really does mention Pluton. That's not a random lore dump. That's tile 1 in a 3-piece set. Pluton under a desert kingdom, Poseidon secretly being Shirahoshi in Fishman Island, Uranus still hanging over the story's head. 3 god-tier weapons that bridge the Void Century to the current balance of power. So every time a poneglyph shows up, it's simultaneously about the past and the endgame. And Robin is the throttle. She is literally the reader's avatar for the main mystery. She survives Ohara, she carries the dead language, and she joins the crew early enough that Oda can pace revelations over 20 years. We only learn what she chooses to translate. We only connect stones when she's emotionally ready to. From a storytelling standpoint, she is a difficulty slider for how fast the truth comes out. Listen to me. You do not invent a global network of indestructible history stones, 3 apocalypse weapons, and a single traumatized survivor who can read them by accident in year 5. That's scaffolding. That's the frame of the house. And notice where the stones are. They're scattered along the Grand Line, almost on a rhythm, sitting in major islands the crew has to visit anyway. They work as narrative save points. Every few arcs, you unlock another chunk of the Void Century, another hint about the weapons, another breadcrumb toward Laughtail. So by the time you hit the final island, you and the characters have assembled enough of the puzzle that the ending doesn't feel pulled out of nowhere, which is where the road pornographist twist comes in. Some stones don't tell you what happened, they tell you where to go next. The world itself becomes a combination lock, and only the crew that collects all 4 coordinates gets to open it. And we need to talk about how each category quietly pays off in specific arcs, because once you track those, the Oda planned everything meme starts looking less like a meme and more like core evidence. And we need to talk about how those categories plug straight into the ancient weapons, because this is where the Oda planned everything meme stops being funny and starts being structural. Go back to Alabasta. On the surface, it's a desert civil war arc. Crocodile, droughts, rebellion, all that. But in the middle of that, buried under a tomb, you get this insane escalation. A poneglyph that doesn't just talk about history, it points to Pluton, a legendary warship so dangerous that the world government is terrified of its blueprints existing. Suddenly, this isn't a local coup, it's a node in a global arms race. And the only reason that works is if the author already knows there are other weapons on the board. Here's the thing. The Pluton thread doesn't stop in Alabasta. Years later, Water 7 drops the bomb that those same blueprints have been secretly guarded by Iceberg and Tom's workers. You realise Oda turned a single proper noun in a desert into the backbone of an entire saga about shipwrights, judicial islands, and the government's willingness to erase a city to control one schematic. That is not a casual decision, that is pre-writing. Now jump to Skypiea. At the time, fans treated it as this weird sky detour. Bell, drum, godman with a lightning fetish. But Oda is quietly seeding Poseidon. You have an ancient sky civilization, lost technology, and crucially, the recurring motif of voices that can be heard but not understood. We meet sea kings in earlier arcs. We hear about the voice of all things. None of that is labelled an ancient weapon yet. Then Fishman Island finally says it out loud. Shirahoshi is Poseidon, the living weapon that commands the Sea Kings. The payoff lands because the groundwork for communication with the sea itself has been sitting there for years. Pattern time. Pluton is a ship tied to land nations and human shipwrights. Poseidon is the sea, embodied in a persecuted underwater kingdom. Uranus, whatever form it takes, is framed around the sky or some unknown domain, and it's implicitly linked to vanished peoples and the highest strata of power. Each weapon is anchored to a different oppressed group or lost civilization. Each one maps onto a different axis of the Void Century War. This is not a sin, this is not random. This is a designed triad. And then you notice the naming scheme. Greek gods, elemental spread, each one hardwired into poneglyphs. I need you to understand how specific that is. An author does not accidentally maintain a three-part naming, elemental and historical system over 20 plus years unless it was planned before chapter 1, which brings us to the government's paranoia. Ohara isn't vaporized just for dangerous research. Robin isn't hunted for fun. Their obsession with anyone who can read poneglyphs, their terror at pirates unifying the seas, all of it points back to a very specific trauma. Someone in the Void Century actually used these things. We need to stop acting like, oh, another cool super weapon is normal. In One Piece, every time a weapon is mentioned, the camera is actually panning back to that lost war, and Uranus is the loaded gun we still haven't seen fire. The fact that it's the last to be named doesn't make it improvised. It makes it the endgame piece. Whatever Imu is guarding, whatever sits above even the Sky Islands, that's where the pre-written outline is saving its final nastiest card. This is fine. This is normal. This is what a decades-long blueprint looks like when it's weaponized against your expectations, which is exactly where the Will of D walks in and flips the table. From chapter 1, Oda slaps a mysterious middle initial onto his protagonist, Monkey D. Luffy. No explanation, no lore dump. Just D sitting there, humming ominously in the background. Then we meet Goldie, Roger, the Pirate King. Port Gas D, Ace the Brother. Jaguar D, a giant Vice Admiral. Marshal D, teacher, the future final boss auditioning with the worst teeth in fiction. Pirates, Marines, Giants, Revolutionaries, all flying the same stray letter. That's not a family tree. That's a category error on purpose. At first, the story treats it as a weird quirk. Characters shrug, Luffy doesn't care, fans move on. This is fine. This is normal. Until suddenly it isn't. In Ohara, you have Saul's name hitting Robin's mum, And the scholars and the world government's reaction is basically, we do not say that letter out loud. At the reverie, the Gorosei whisper about D, as if merely acknowledging it might summon Joy Boy through the ceiling. The same syllable that was a gag-level non-issue in East Blue quietly becomes a taboo, a word you only say when you're also ordering a Buster Call. Here's the thing, that escalation is not accidental. It's foreshadowing by slow burn taboo. Every time a D shows up, the inherited will theme gets louder. Roger learns the truth, laughs, and deliberately hands his dream to the next generation rather than winning himself. Luffy literally carries Shanks' hat, a physical baton of that dream. Ace dies on the scaffold, and his execution doesn't just hurt you emotionally. It detonates a new era, forces the Yonko balance to wobble, and pushes Luffy toward the throne of the sea. Each D, action, each D. Death nudges the world one step closer to remembering what it's been ordered to forget. So when people say, maybe Oda's just making D up as he goes, I need you to sit down. You don't sprinkle a mysterious middle initial on your protagonist, your final boss, and your Pirate King unless you know exactly what that letter stands for. That's not retrofitting. That's pre-writing with a neon sign. The cleanest read is that the D clan are the living remnants of the Void Century's losing side. Not in the shallow, secret royal bloodline way the community always reaches for, but in a thematic, ideological sense. They are walking fragments of that erased kingdom's worldview. Their existence is a narrative countdown timer. As long as D-Kid, people keep crashing into history, the moment the world remembers the Void Century keeps getting closer. And while everyone's busy asking, does D mean devil? Dawn? Donuts? Oda's running a misdirection game. The literal meaning is the red herring. The functional meaning is what matters. Everywhere a D goes, the status quo breaks. Luffy dismantles regimes by accident. Teach weaponizes the era of piracy into something uglier. Saul defies orders and saves Ohara's future. These are walking foreshadowing devices, not Scrabble tiles. Notice who's scared. The same people who carved the Poneglyphs out of history, who hoard ancient weapons, are the ones terrified of that initial. That's not coincidence. That's a straight line from the Lost Kingdom to these individuals' veins. The D are the human version of a poneglyph. Indestructible, scattered, quietly spelling out a message about Joy Boy and the promised dawn. And we're not done. Later in the video, we need to lay all the D, the characters on a single timeline, line up their actions with Void Century clues, and show you how they form one continuous chain of foreshadowing that points directly at Joy Boy's return and the final war the author planned before Luffy ever put on that hat. So let's finally say his name out loud, because Fishman Island doesn't treat it as a twist. Joy Boy. On that poneglyph, he's not a legend, he's a guy writing an apology letter. Sorry I couldn't keep my promise to the mermaid princess. That's not myth building, that's a failed calendar invite. And Oda just drops this in the middle of a sugary underwater arc as if he didn't just introduce the emotional core of the Void Century. From there we track backward. Joy Boy's promise is tied to Noah, this absurdly huge ship guarded for centuries by people who don't even know why, and to the Sea Kings who literally say they're waiting for someone who can hear them and guide that arc. The dream of bringing fishmen to the surface, of the promised day when they can stand in the sun, is sitting right there. Joy Boy is the symbol of a future that was supposed to happen and didn't. Luffy's entire job is to take that broken future and finish it. Now, here's the thing. Skypiea already ran this experiment. Ancient city in the sky? Check. Golden bell designed to carry a message across centuries? Check. A warrior who hears the voice of something greater and fights to protect that legacy? Check again. That arc is a thematic test run for Joy Boy. It's Oda rehearsing the problem of a message that needs to cross time and the one idiot brave enough to ring it loud enough. Luffy ringing the bell for cricket is not just closure for a side character. It's a prototype for Joy Boy's entire deal. He climbs a death island, punches a god, and then announces to the world, the dream you thought was a joke, it was real. You weren't crazy. Joy Boy's message was supposed to do that on a global scale and got cut off. Luffy keeps accidentally finishing other people's destinies and broadcasting their truths. Listen to me. When a story keeps showing you ancient ruins, failed promises, and a goofy rubber kid accidentally finishing other people's destinies, that's not random. That's Joy Boy's shadow. You don't need the name on a title card to see the author's hand. This is intentional, pre-written scaffolding for a role that already existed in Oda's notes. And then Wano and Egghead tell you Joy Boy and Nika are intertwined, and suddenly early panels start buzzing. The sun motifs, the drums, Luffy's silhouette stretching across a moon, that stupid grin as he liberates oppressed people from Arlong to Skypiea to Eni's lobby. Retroactively, it's all humming with Joy Boy energy. Fans in the community call this Oda retrofitting, but the consistency of the imagery pushes it into a different category. This is not a sin. This is not random. This is a blueprint finally being revealed. I need you to see the escalation here, because once we stack Joy Boy on top of the D-Clan, the ancient weapons, and those harmless government conferences called the Reverie, the final war stops being a surprise twist and starts looking very much like a scheduled rematch 800 years overdue. And we need to talk about how Oda planted that war before we even met half the combatants. And that scheduled rematch doesn't just exist at the level of empires and ancient gods. It's baked into the dreams of 10 idiots on one ship. Listen to me. The Straw Hat dreams are not quirky character flavor. They are structural, load-bearing beams. Luffy says he'll be Pirate King. Zoro wants to be the world's greatest swordsman. Nami will draw a map of the entire world. Usopp will become a brave warrior of the sea. Sanji is chasing all blue. Chopper wants to cure any disease. Robin will learn the true history. Frankie will build a ship that sails to the end. Brook will reunite with Laboon. Jim B wants true coexistence between humans and fishmen. That's not vibes. That's a checklist. Here's the thing. When an author states those dreams that early, that clearly, they've just signed 10 narrative contracts in front of the entire community. You don't casually say map of the entire world unless you intend to show us the entire world. You don't casually say true history when the government executes people for asking questions. Each dream is a promise about future locations, future conflicts, future reveals. Robin is the cleanest example. Her Ohara backstory doesn't just make her sad, it makes her dream literally a war crime. Learn the true history is secretly solve the Void Century, expose the ancient weapons, and topple the people who blew up my island. That dream is fused to the core mystery spine of the story. You cannot pay off Robin without detonating the world order. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is the author telling you the end game in code. Brook and Laboon are the other smoking gun. Reverse Mountain is early East Blue. Brook shows up hundreds of chapters later, yet the promise lines up perfectly. A nameless musician who never came back turns out to be the skeleton on the ghost ship who still hears Laboon's song. That's not our pattern-seeking monkey brain seeing Jesus in toast. That's intentional pre-writing. Andy's all-blue dream? On the surface, it's a chef wanting a magic ocean. Underneath, it's a demand that the geography of the world itself must change. All seas meeting means the red line and grand line structure have to be broken or reconfigured. Suddenly All Blue is not a side quest, it's a consequence of the final war. And we need to admit this. When a writer locks in 10 different endgame conditions in the first third of the story and still hits them, that's not vibes, that's a spreadsheet. Even the small dreams are rigged. Usopp's brave warrior thing starts as a gag, but Oda quietly weaponizes his lies. He says he met giants, then we go to Elbaf. He talks about being a sniper god. Then we get Sogeking and literal observation sniping. The lies foreshadow the arcs. The joke is a roadmap. Nami's map requires understanding the true shape of the world. Frankie's dream demands a ship that can survive the final sea, whatever nightmare waits beyond Laugh Tale. Jinbe's coexistence only works if the reverie, the celestial dragons, and the slavery system are dismantled on screen. These aren't side dishes. They're wired into Joy Boy, the D and the Void Century. I need you to hold that in your head, because next we're zooming in. Individual straw hats, designs, running gags, throwaway lines. All the tiny details that quietly spoiled their future power-ups and story beats while you were busy arguing about bounties. So here's where it gets disrespectful. Because once you zoom in on individual straw hats, you realize Oda isn't just drawing outfits, he's drawing roadmaps. Every silhouette, every motif, every weird accessory is basically a little spoiler tag taped to their forehead. Start with the obvious one, Luffy. The straw hat is not drip, it's documentation. It is a literal inheritance of Roger's will, passed through Shanks parked on this rubber idiot's head from chapter 1. That's not cozy pirate branding. That is the author quietly saying, this kid is the continuation of the Pirate King problem. Then you add the rubber body. On day 1, Oda locks in a design that can stretch, inflate, twist, and snap. And decades later, we're pretending to be shocked when Gear 2, Gear 4, and Nika all turn out to be exaggerated cartoon physics baked into the premise. Zoro is the same disease. 3 swords, Haramaki, bandana, scar magnet. You are told visually before he speaks that this man is a walking shrine to overkill. The 3-sword silhouette lets Oda escalate into demon imagery, Asura forms, cursed blades, all without ever feeling random because the design already screamed, this is the guy who will look inhuman when he's serious. Nami, orange hair, blue tattoo, tangerines, pinwheel and a staff. She is literally color-coded for wind, sea and storms. Her entire vibe is weather witch in training. Years before the climate act turns her into a climate manipulator who redraws the battlefield. Robin might be the most blatant. Dark clothes, scholar posture, perpetual sunglasses, and that flower motif on her powers. She is the blooming of forbidden history. Every time her arms sprout from stone, from books, from ancient ruins, the story is visually whispering, the past will grow back whether the government wants it to or not. Frankie is even louder. Cyborg, speedo, shipwright tools bolted into his body. He walks on screen as a spoiler that technology and warships are going to matter in the endgame, that the Thousand Sunny itself is a Chekhov's gun with a lion figurehead. Brooke looks like a gag. Skeleton, afro, violin, aha, funny bone man. Except then you learn Laboon, the 50-year promise, the soul powers, the literal separation of body and spirit. Suddenly that design stops being a Halloween joke and becomes tragic foreshadowing. This is what it costs to keep a promise across half a century. Listen to me, Oda does not accidentally give a character a sun tattoo, a specific animal theme, or a weird scar. That's a post-it note to his future self. Chopper's reindeer-human hybrid is not random. It's permission to go full Monster Point later. And Sanji's suit, cigarettes, and chivalry are not just cool guy coding. They're breadcrumbs to Germa royalty, raid suits, and the uncomfortable fact that he was always a failed science project in a tux. And it's not just the crew. Dragon's huge. Curling tattoo, Shanks' missing arm and eye scars, Blackbeard's mismatched teeth and off-kilter body shape. The community memed these for years, but those are quiet endgame flags. The author is tagging them visually as important pieces before he ever drops their bounties or titles. Here's the thing, once you start reading designs as roadmaps, the entire series turns into a symbol hunt. Suns, chains, crowns, recurring animal motifs. We need to talk about those because later in the video, I'm going to walk you through how those specific symbols keep looping back to Joy Boy, Nika, and the world government's original sin, and you are not going to be able to unsee it. I need you to remember every sun you've ever glossed over because those panels are about to start screaming. Those suns and chains aren't alone. The panels are screaming. But the dialogue has been yelling this whole time too, and you just thought it was background noise. Here's the thing, Oda weaponizes throwaway lines. I'm not talking about big ominous speeches. I mean the drunk guy at the bar, the goofy grandpa, the cook rambling about his dream. A character tosses out a casual comment that reads as flavor text, world-building fluff, a joke to fill space, and then 300 chapters later, that exact fluff is the spine of an arc. That is a pattern. That is intentional. Take the Reverie. Early on, it's just this distant political summit people mention. The way you mention that big conference in Meriadre or whatever, no explanation, no diagram. It sounds boring on purpose, but those lines quietly establish that the kings actually meet, they vote, they have history. Years later, when we finally sit in on the Reverie, it doesn't feel introduced, it feels remembered, weak. Your brain goes, oh, that thing, and suddenly the world has continuity instead of exposition. Same category with All Blue, and Sanji's dream initially scans as a cook's fairy tale ocean. Cute, fun, probably impossible. This is fine. This is normal. Except the more you learn about Redline, Calm Belt, and the Grand Line structure, the more that joke turns into a geometric problem the story has to solve. All Blue stops being a punchline and becomes a thesis about how the world itself might be broken and need to be remixed. And before any of that, you're getting tossed terms like Shichibukai and Yonko in passing, with zero lore dump. Characters react to those words before you even know what they mean. That's not sloppy writing, that's the author planting social gravity. By the time those systems are finally explained, your brain has already filed them under real institutions because people have been casually complaining about them for years. Now Garp. Garp is evil, not in the story, in the craft. His first impression is a comedy sketch. Sleepy dumb dog mask, getting smacked around by Luffy. Grandpa energy, no threat. And buried in that routine, he jokes about Luffy's dad in this offhand, oh yeah, that guy, way. The community treated it as a gag. Then, boom, Monkey D, dragon most wanted man in the world. That joke wasn't a joke. That was a live grenade with a smiley face drawn on it. Blackbeard gets the same treatment. Drunk in Mocktown, ranting about pies and dreams, shouting that a man's dream never ends. It reads as bar philosophy. Then you realise that line is his mission statement as Luffy's Dark Mirror, another D, who refuses to let the previous era's dream die. He just mutates it into something monstrous. That's not vibes. That's foreshadowing. We need to stop calling these lucky callbacks. When a joke from 2002 becomes a plot twist in 2015, that's not luck. That's a man with a notebook and a grudge against casual readers. I need you to understand how petty that level of planning is. And it's not just in the manga proper. Oda's SBS answers are a whole second channel. He'll half-jokingly answer a question about, say, a character's hometown or an emblem on a ship. Everyone laughs, moves on, and then 10 years later that haha maybe detail is hard canon. This is not a sin. This is not bad faith. This is just an author who uses Q&A pages as stealth foreshadowing. Functionally, all of this is a retention tool. Those throwaway lines make the world feel lived in now, then reward you later so it feels the story remembers everything you've ever read. It trains you to trust that nothing is wasted, which keeps you scanning every panel for future ammunition. And because I know you, pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, we're not done. Later in the video, I'm going to pull all of these together and walk you through a mini timeline of jokes that became canon so you can see in order just how far ahead Oda was aiming with specific arcs. You will not guess all of them. Listen to me, there are lines you have completely forgotten that are going to ruin you. And some of those lines, they're not even in the panels you're reading. They're in the margins, they're on the covers. We need to talk about the most disrespected source of foreshadowing in this entire community. Cover stories. Here's the thing, on paper, cover stories are nothing. Little comedic postcards at the start of the chapter. What is Buggy doing after Orangetown? Did Hachi ever get out of Arlong Park? It feels disposable. This is fine. This is normal. Most authors use that space for pin-ups and jokes. Oda turned it into a stealth second narrative that's been hijacking the main plot for 20 years. Cover stories are mini-arcs. Means self-contained, a few panels at a time, following side characters after the Straw Hats leave. The gag is that you're watching the B-team struggle off-screen while the main story sails on. The problem is that Oda is incapable of doing anything just for fun. Those goofy vignettes end up being deliberate pipelines for future villains, allies, and entire world events. Example, Kobe and Helmeppo. They vanish early, everyone assumes they're done, and then their cover story quietly walks them through marine training, GARP mentorship, and a complete personality rebuild. But when they crash back into the narrative post-Eni's lobby, they don't feel retrofitted. The groundwork is already there. The author literally showed you the training montage on chapter covers you probably skipped. Hachi, same deal. He escapes, wanders, opens a takoyaki stand, befriends Kami and Pape, and that silly little food truck sitcom becomes the on-ramp to Sabaody, merfolk politics, and the fishman discrimination discourse. Baroque Works members get epilogues that reposition them across the globe. CP9 gets a whole redemption-adjacent arc in the covers that moves them back onto the board for later. The world keeps moving when Luffy isn't there, and the covers are the camera following it. Listen to me. When the dude is foreshadowing space lore and ancient civilizations in the chapter covers, you have to admit he's playing a longer game than you are. Enel's moon expedition is not a meme. That cover story escalates from Enel goes to space to Enel discovers an ancient city, lunar hieroglyphs, and an army of automata that look suspiciously compatible with Vegapunk's whole deal. That is void century-adjacent information being drip-fed in what most series treat as wallpaper. I need you to understand what that means for pre-writing. Cover stories are Oda's sandbox. He can test ideas, seed factions, and foreshadow technology without burning main story page real estate. That's why some of the wildest setups live there. The future Grand Fleet, half those captains are introduced, tracked, or at least contextualized in covers years before Dressrosa formalizes the alliance. Reverie. Tons of faces at that table have been quietly aging, failing, or scheming in cover story slices while you were scrolling past to get to the punch. So if you've been treating cover stories as optional, you've basically been watching One Piece with one eye closed. They're not extras, they're the B-plot of a 27-year outline, the connective tissue that makes later arcs feel premeditated instead of coincidental. And there is one specific cover sequence, Enel, the moon, and those broken robots, that read now might as well have a neon sign saying Void Century Tech here. We're going to come back to that when we talk about ancient civilizations, the moon, and how early Oda started sketching the real history of his world. And once you start seeing that, you start noticing the other ticking bombs he hides in plain sight. The jokes. Here's the thing. Oda has a very specific tactic with running gags. He introduces a behavior as a joke. He repeats it until your brain files it under harmless bit. Then one day he flips it, dead serious, and you realize that gag was foreshadowing the whole time. The gun on the mantelpiece isn't a clue. It's a rubber chicken that turns into a real gun 300 episodes later. Usopp is the cleanest example, and I need you to really sit with how intentional this is. In Syrup Village, he's telling kids about giant goldfish that poop islands, moles the size of houses, islands in the sky, warriors of the sea. It reads as coward's bravado, as this sad little performance for an audience of children. Fast forward, Little Garden, Alabasta, Skypiea, the giants, the actual mole, the literal Sky Island. One by one the lies come true. That is not coincidence. That is an author quietly mapping world building and a character arc through a bit that the community wrote off as comedy. Because when those lies start coming true, Usopp's identity shifts. He stops being the boy who runs away into fantasy and starts becoming the man whose fantasies are a rough draft of reality. The running gag is a prophecy machine. It foreshadows both the absurd scale of the world and his evolution into a brave warrior of the sea he invented for himself. Appears Monster Point works the same category of trick, but on the horror axis. At first is played as a scary gag. Adorable reindeer turns into uncontrollable kaiju. Everyone freaks out. Oh no, Chopper's gone berserk again. The framing invites a nervous laugh. This is fine. This is normal. Then Oda slowly reclassifies it. He gives Chopper a time limit, then Rumble Ball refinements, then post-time skip control. The joke about the monster inside him becomes the core of his arc. A doctor who is also a monster, who chooses to weaponize the thing he hates about himself to save others. Sanji's womanizing is the same bait. Early on, it's a clownish bit. Nosebleeds, heart eyes, Nami Swan. Fans meme it to death. But listen to me. That never kick a woman rule is chained directly to his Germa trauma, to Sora, to his desperate need to be anything other than the emotionless soldier he was bred to be. When he refuses to fight Khalifa, when he breaks down on the phone with Nami on Whole Cake, the gag suddenly costs him. The joke cashes out as a wound. We need to talk about how dangerous it is that Oda can hide trauma and future power-ups inside jokes. You laugh once, and 10 years later you're crying over the punchline. Luffy's idiocy is the stealth version. The community treats Luffy as dumb as a meme, but watch how often his stupid questions drill straight into the moral core of an arc. Every single week, he accidentally says the exact thing a slave, a child, a tyrant needs to hear. That's not random, that's an author using a gag to mask an instinctive philosophy of freedom and justice until the pattern is undeniable. And because these behaviours are repeated for years, when Oda finally turns the joke serious, it feels inevitable. Earned. Not some last-minute power-up, not a retrofit, but the only way this could have gone. You've seen the bit 100 times, you just didn't know it was a countdown. Later in the video, we're going to literally line up some of these haha moments next to their payoffs and walk through the timing so you can see exactly how early Oda starts winding the spring before he lets it snap. And once you start seeing those countdowns, you start noticing something worse. The same countdown keeps happening. Different island, different costumes, same skeleton under the skin. Here's the thing. Oda doesn't just foreshadow with objects or jokes. He foreshadows with entire arcs. He takes a core story, oppressed people, tyrannical ruler, buried history, a tiny symbol of hope, and he runs it again and again with different variables until you can feel the original version that happened 800 years ago. Alabasta is your first big template. A desert kingdom rotting from the inside. A usurper using the system's own paranoia to turn the people against their ruler. A princess running around in disguise begging anyone to believe her, and a single symbol. The dancing powder, the X on the arm. There's a hidden truth here. Luffy walks in, punches the false savior, and leaves the country standing but shaken. And Skypiea hits, and suddenly that same skeleton is wearing a different mask. Oppressed Sky people, a self-proclaimed god-hoarding technology in history, a literal lost city containing records of the Void Century, and a promise from Joy Boy that never got fulfilled. Luffy again plays Liberator, but notice the twist. He doesn't fix the ancient sin. He just stops the current tyrant and keeps moving. The original wound stays open. Dressrosa? At that point, if you're not seeing the pattern, you are the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast but somehow misses the loaf. Corrupt ruler, stolen throne, toys erased from memory, an entire nation gaslit into forgetting what really happened. A rebellion brewing under the surface. A gladiator hero who was supposed to be the country's protector, completely broken. Luffy doesn't just free the people, he exposes the mechanism of control itself. Wano is the upgraded simulation. Closed borders, a puppet shogun installed by an outside monster, history literally outlawed, and a clan that carried the knowledge of the Void Century and the Poneglyphs across generations. Echoing Vivian Rebecca, as the princess tied to an ancient legacy, standing there with the shamisen while her country burns, representing centuries of trauma that started in that blank 100 years. Listen to me. When the same story keeps happening on different islands with slightly different variables, There's not a lack of ideas. There's a writer showing you the equation before he solves it for real. This is not a sin. This is intentional, structural foreshadowing. Every time Luffy steps in as Liberator, the job description gets refined. In Alabasta, it's beat the bad guy. In Skypiea, it's defy a god and ring the bell so the truth is heard. In Dressrosa, it's tear down the propaganda machine. In Wano, it's overthrow a world power's proxy and reopen a country that holds the key to the Void Century, and you feel the cost ratchet up each time. We need to stop treating these parallels as lazy repetition and start reading them as training simulations for the final war. Oda is conditioning you. He's teaching you what it looks like when a false god falls, how a rebellion actually gets sparked, how a symbol, a mark on an arm, a flag, a drumbeat, can rally people who've been taught to be afraid. And here's the part the community keeps underselling. Those little details about how kingdoms fall, how history is erased, how princesses carry inherited guilt. Those are going to be the toolkit for the endgame. The strategies you saw in Alabasta and Dressrosa are the rough drafts of whatever happens when Luffy finally points that punch at the world government itself. I need you to hold that in your head, because later we're going to take one of these arcs and map it beat for beat onto the Void Century using nothing but poneglyph crumbs and world reactions. And suddenly that hidden original story is going to stop being abstract and start feeling disturbingly familiar. Because here's the thing, once you realize there's a hidden original story under every arc, you also have to confront how often Oda is actively steering your eyes away from it. This is misdirection, not in the cheap gotcha twist sense, but in the stage magician sense. He gives you a loud, flashy question to obsess over. Who is Joy Boy? What is Gear Second? Can they save Ace? While he quietly plants the seeds for the real payoff 3 panels to the left. You stare at the fireworks. The blueprint is in the smoke. Water 7 and Eni's lobby are the cleanest example. On first read, your brain files that whole saga under Robin Rescue Arc and CP9 Cool Fight Tournament. You're tracking doors, train heists, Luffy punching a flag. This is fine, this is normal. But structurally, those arcs are a seminar on the world government's relationship to history, ancient weapons, Void Century research, a single island of shipwrights who can build something the government is terrified of existing. While you're crying over I want to live, Oda is quietly normalizing the idea that the government will erase entire islands to keep a secret. Marineford does the same trick on a global scale. The marketing promise is simple: save Ace. The community framed it as the emotional climax of pre-time skip. And it is. But watch what the author is actually cataloguing. The Yonko arrive, the Admiral's flex, the Shichibukai posture. Blackbeard assembles a horror show crew and steals a second devil fruit in front of the world. The war fails in its stated goal on purpose, because its real function is to map the power hierarchy, foreshadow Blackbeard as the anti-Luffy, and emotionally justify we need to disappear for 2 years. You zoom out to the early arcs and you see the same pattern. Flashy villains, goofy gags, clown pirates, fishmen, desert warlords. Your attention is on the punchline and the punch. Meanwhile, there's a quiet, consistent pattern. The government covers up Ohara, censors scholars, brands anyone who studies history a demon, and weaponizes justice as PR. Every time you laugh at a joke about bounties or marines, there's usually a panel in the same chapter where some nobody gets crushed under that system. We need to admit Oda is a magician. He waves one hand with a cool fight, and with the other he slips a Void Century clue into a background panel. A random globe in a room, a symbol on a book spine, a throwaway line about a certain kingdom. On weekly release you miss it. On reread, you feel like a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast, except the toast has a poneglyph carved into it. Listen to me. This misdirection is not just for fun. It's structural protection by feeding you satisfying short-term payoffs, rescuing Robin, avenging Vivi, failing to save Ace but gaining purpose. He buys himself decades to roll out the real plot without you feeling stalled. And every single week, You're not waiting for answers. You're busy eating the course in front of you, while the main dish slow cooks in the back. And that's where Misdirection loops back into foreshadowing. The clues are intentional. They're always there. Our attention is what's being redirected, which is why rereads feel insane, because you realize there's a second story running underneath the first one, fully planned, just quieter. In the next section, I need you to watch as we pull back even further and show how all of this, world building, character dreams, visual symbols, jokes, parallels, and this magician-level misdirection snaps together into one coherent payoff machine, and how Oda's been cranking that handle from chapter 1. So here's where all those threads stop being trivia and start being machinery. We've walked through the big foreshadowing channels, the world map and grand line structure that turns the whole planet into a rail for reveals, the Poneglyph network quietly logging the void century, ancient weapons lurking behind every major war, the Will of D, and Joy Boy as mythic placeholders for answers Oda already knew. Straw Hat dreams as long-term contracts with the author, character designs and throwaway dialogue hints, cover stories doing side quest exposition, running gags that mutate into trauma. That's not a bag of party tricks. That's a system. Here's the thing. In that system, no arc is allowed to be just an adventure. Every new island has to do 3 jobs. 1. Tell a local story with its own conflict and emotional payoff. 2. Advance at least one Straw Hat dream, even if it's microscopic. 3. Drop at least one clue about the core mysteries. Void Sentry, D, Joy Boy, Ancient Weapons, Laugh Tale, Imu. If an arc doesn't hit those categories, it basically doesn't exist in One Piece. Alabasta is a perfect example. On the surface, it's a civil war and a princess. Underneath, it's the first real deployment of Poneglyphs, ancient weapons, and the world government's terror response. Same chapters, 3 jobs. Skypiea does it with Nolan's Legend, the Sky People drama, and then, casually, a giant stone with Goldie Roger was here, carved into the side. This is not a sin. This is not accidental. This is planned storytelling workload. And Oda runs this with layering. Early arcs introduce concepts in baby form. A weird stone nobody can read, an initial D. That makes people nervous. A kid screaming about being Pirate King. Mid-arcs complicate them. Now the stones are a global network. The D-D-der. Clan keeps toppling regimes. Those dreams collide with political summits and buster calls. Late arcs finally flip the card. Void Sentry, Joy Boy's identity, Nika, Emu on the empty throne. Listen to me. What looks like chaos week to week is actually clockwork decade to decade. You just weren't looking at the right timescale. Our brains see random gag dragon with Kinnaman. 10 years later, it's Wano's national trauma. We see funny rubber man. 20 years later, it's a sun god pre-written into Skypiea iconography. Because you've lived with the setup for years, the payoff hits this bizarre emotional double exposure. It's shocking in the moment, but it also feels inevitable. Of course, Robin is tied to the Poneglyphs. Of course, Laboon's gag headbutts are a 400 chapter promise to Brook. Your subconscious clock has been ticking the whole time. So from here, we need to zoom in, era by era. East Blue Alabasta Saga, Skypiea, Water 7 and Enies Lobby, Marineford, post-time skip. I'm going to show you receipts. Timelines of when concepts are introduced versus when they pay off. Side-by-side panel comparisons and how a single early line can echo into 3 different arcs. And when we go back to East Blue with this framework, Orange Town and Syrup Village stop being simple warm-ups. They start reading like Oda screaming the ending at you in baby talk. Next section is where you find out exactly what he was saying. And when we go back to East Blue with that in mind, something really stupid happens. Gold D. Roger stops being a cool pirate name and starts reading as a 27-year setup. Because on page 1, Gold D, Roger and Monkey D. Luffy just scan as Oda having fun. Goofy Rubber Kid. Goofy Pirate King, middle initial, whatever. You don't stop reading Shonen Chapter 1 to build a conspiracy corkboard over a punctuation mark. This is fine, this is normal. But listen to me, the D is one of the earliest clues that Oda is not improvising his endgame. Here's the thing, if D were a retrofit, it would stay vague, or it would get explained quickly once fans noticed. Instead, it escalates in controlled, intentional bursts. Ohara flashback, Jaguar D, Soul. Suddenly the D isn't just a family quirk. It's on a giant, a scholar's ally. A man who literally tells Robin that one day your friends will find you. Then we meet Marshall D. Teach, the first D, who is openly monstrous and Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, the edgy surgeon of death who hides his own name. Giant, villain, underground doctor, every new D is a new category of person, a new facet of the same secret, and somehow zero clarification. And then Oda starts looping in the death smiles. Roger grinning on the execution platform, Saul laughing as the Buster Call obliterates him. Luffy, who has no idea what the will of D even is, smiling through Crocodile's hook, Eni's lobby, Marineford, whole catalogue of you should be traumatized right now moments. The pattern isn't subtle. Those who carry the name of D are fated to bring another storm. The D, every wazza, once again. All of that whispered void century rhetoric. That's not edgy fortune cookie nonsense. That's the author quietly encoding a cultural memory. These are the people who laughed in the face of the original gods. Inside the story, everyone who knows anything treats the initial as radioactive. Law hides the D from his own crew. Then Goku is visibly annoyed that Garp has been breeding DS in the Marines. The Gorosei go from her to absolutely not the second Luffy's name hits their desk. Corazon literally kneels down and tells Kid Law, those with the name of D are the natural enemies of the gods. That's meta foreshadowing. That's Oda, putting a giant neon sign on this letter and then pretending it's just a fun detail for 20 years. You cannot separate that from the other mystery pillars we've already started poking at. Void Century, Ancient Weapons, Laugh Tale, boy. All of them are historically framed, all of them cluster around the same 100 missing years, and all of them keep getting verbally stapled to the D in little lines the community screenshotted and then forgot. You do not maintain that consistent symbolic behaviour across hundreds of chapters unless you already know the endpoint, and I need you to clock the receipts. Inherited will. The D will bring another storm. Roger and Rayleigh laughing at the final island, promising to turn the world upside down too early. That's not Oda discovering the theme in year 15. That's pre-writing. The D is the human interface for the Void Century reveal. The people are the payload, which means we need to ask a much dumber, much scarier question. If the D are walking time bombs, where else has Oda snuck them in? Because that smiling at death pattern quietly infects character arcs, alliances, even entire islands we haven't touched yet. And when we get to myth building and the final war foreshadowing, you're going to realize the D was never a joke initial. It was the fuse. And if the D are the fuse, then the ancient weapons are the actual dynamite. This is where the Oda planned everything meme stops being a meme and turns into a spreadsheet. Go back to Alabasta. We're still in the early game, the community is arguing about power levels, and Oda just drops the sentence, world-ending battleship, in Crocodile's mouth. No fan knows the Void Century. We don't know the Gorosei. We barely understand the Marines. And yet Crocodile is obsessed with Pluton, buried under a desert kingdom, encoded on a stone only one outlaw archaeologist can read. That's not a Saturday morning villain scheme. That's the author quietly placing a nuke on the board before we even know what the board is. Here's the thing. Pluton isn't just a concept. It's stapled to geography and character. Alabaster's Poneglyph doesn't give Crocodile Pluton. It gives Robin a data point in a network. Then we go to Skypiea, And suddenly, there's another poneglyph, this time pointing to Poseidon. Stones, same script. Different island, different sky, same hidden war. This is not a sin, this is not random. This is system design. Poseidon is where you really see the pre-writing. Long before Shirahoshi cries her way into the story, we already have sea kings behaving oddly, we have the Noah sitting at the bottom of Fishman Island, and we have prophecies about a promised day when a certain figure will guide the fishmen to the surface. When Neptune finally says Shirahoshi is Poseidon, it doesn't read as a twist the author improvised during the time skip. It reads as a reveal the story has been nervously circling for hundreds of chapters, and every time an arc brushes an ancient weapon, the Void Century alarm goes off. Alabaster's Poneglyph, Skypiea's message from Joy Boy, Water 7 and Ennie's lobby digging into shipwrights, blueprints, and the government's terror of a single design. Every single week, Fishman Island tying Poseidon to Joy Boy's broken promise. Wano parking Pluton under an entire closed country. Different arcs, different tones, same conflict. World government versus history, present versus buried record. Now, I need you to notice the naming. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus. Fans treat this as cool mythology seasoning, but those gods are land/underworld, sea, and sky. That maps almost too cleanly onto a planet split by a red line, wrapped by a grand line, policed by weather and currents. Weapons aren't just thematically on brand. They're a mirror of the world's physical structure we talked about earlier. Listen to me. In universe, people talk about these things as a known pattern. King Neptune is terrified because he's read the stories. Robin grew up on Ohara hearing weapon names as historical fact. The Gorosei react to ancient weapon intel with "this again," not "what's that?" That's internal historical consistency you don't get by winging it. And notice the pacing. First, we get Pluton as blueprints and rumours. Much later, Poseidon's identity. Only then do we get Uranus as a whisper attached to Imu's silhouette and the Lelucia erasure beam. Land, sea, sky revealed in that order as we approach the promised Great War. That's not vibes. That's a drip feed calibrated to crescendo exactly when Oda wants the apocalypse on screen. Which means when we hit the reverie, when we talk about Imu and those crossed out posters, the ancient weapons stop being abstract lore. They become the literal buttons for the end of the world Oda sketched out before chapter 1. And we need to talk about how he's been aiming the story at those buttons for 27 years. So when those end of the world buttons finally come into frame, where does Oda put them? Not in some dungeon, in a conference room. I need you to sit with how stupid that sounds and how brilliant it actually is. The reverie is the payoff to 20 years of the story whispering, hey, there's a world outside the Straw Hats, and you just scrolling past it for the fight scenes. Because here's the thing, the reverie is not new. The word levelly shows up all the way back in Alabaster, buried in Cobra's dialogue about kings meeting every few years. We hear about a council of monarchs, about world decisions being made off screen, and the community collectively goes, neat exposition, where's Crocodile? That's intentional. That's pre-writing. The author is hanging the meeting room on the wall in Alabaster because he already knows one day he's going to put Imu in that chair. And all those self-contained kingdom arcs, they were never self-contained. Alabaster gives you Cobra and Vivi, a reformist king and a princess who literally walks away from the Straw Hats to go be a politician. Brum gives you Wephole, the clownish tyrant. Sakura Kingdom gives you Dalton, and Kureha, the rebranded post-tyrant state. Fishman Island gives you Otohime's signatures and the dream of going to the surface. Dressrosa gives you Riku, Rebecca, and a country begging the world to admit the warlord system is a scam. Every one of those arcs leaves you with a royal, a princess, or a political stake that has exactly one place to converge. A global summit. Oda doesn't drop that between arcs. He weaponizes the cover stories. Vivi and Karoo wandering the world. Weapole failing upward into corporate royalty. The Straw Hat fleet captains getting their own little epilogues, quietly becoming independent political actors. Those aren't cute bonus comics. That's Oda keeping global politics alive in your peripheral vision, so when Reverie finally hits, it feels inevitable rather than suddenly Oda cares about kings now. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is what planned payoff looks like. And structurally, the build-up is absurd. Garp casually mentions escorting royalty. Newspapers talk about the Levelly schedule. We get the 170 allied nations stat, dropped years before we ever see more than a handful. Each detail is a breadcrumb. On its own, harmless. In aggregate, it's a GPS coordinate stamped on the story. We are going to the world's boardroom. And once we're there, the Reverie becomes the narrative blender for decades of foreshadowing. Vivi's return, Fishman Island's petition to reach the surface, a baladition of the Warlord system, which cashes in 20 years of "these guys are a problem" discourse. Sabo's mission and the Revolutionary Army finally colliding with celestial dragons in public. If you ever felt you were a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast with this series, Reverie is Oda turning on the projector and going, "No, that's the mural." Then he drops Emu. The empty throne, symbol of equality, is revealed as a lie. The five elders physically kneel, and the hidden king of the world mystery that's been haunting the Void Century and the Will of D suddenly has a face. That's not random escalation. That's the moment the background conspiracy steps onto the main stage. Reverie is the global check-in before the final war, the last time Oda lines up all his chess pieces and shows you the board. And we need to talk about how even that empty throne and the shadow sitting on it were being set up way earlier than they look. So when the Reverie finally walks us into that chamber, you're supposed to think, ah yes, a perfectly balanced, totally responsible global democracy. 20 kings, the Gorosei as neutral administrators, the Marines as an impersonal justice machine, and at the centre, an empty throne. No single ruler, no tyrant. It's almost aggressively fairy tale. And that should already make you suspicious, because here's the thing. Oda has never written a system that clean without immediately showing you the rot. Very early on, the world government sells you this PR image, but the story keeps slipping and showing the wiring underneath. And the Buster call on Ohara is the first giant red flag. You don't erase an island of librarians because a committee got a little heated, but as a top-down, no questions asked, someone said so order. The community usually files that under the Gorosei are ruthless. But listen to me, even the Gorosei talk like middle managers. They're constantly worrying about maintaining balance, about the risks of information in a way that implies they're reporting to a KPI you haven't met yet. HCP-9 is another example. A Black Ops assassination unit, embedded in a random shipyard for 5 years, answering to who exactly? Spandam? The guy who trips over his own sword? This is not a sin, this is normal spy fiction structure. The clown in front is never the one holding the leash. Which brings us to the Celestial Dragons. They're such cartoonishly evil, air bubble wearing, slave collecting goblins that fans understandably focus all their hatred there and stop asking the obvious question, who do these people fear? Who can tell a god no? Oda weaponizes that. It gives you the most punchable faces in the story as decoys so you don't look past them at the accounting department of evil. And he keeps pointing the camera at Mirageois. Repeated wide shots of Pangaea Castle. The room of authority with that staircase framed like a church aisle. The empty throne treated with literal religious reverence. Swords around it like offerings. The founding of the world government is talked about in quasi-biblical terms. 20 kings, one promise, a symbol of shared rule. I need you to notice how much ceremony is wrapped around a chair that supposedly belongs to no one. So when Emu just strolls up and sits on it, that's not a random escalation. That's the punchline to a decades-long setup. The Gorosei, these highest authorities, immediately kneel. They ask Emu to choose which lights will be erased. Luffy, Blackbeard, Vivi, Shirahoshi. That list is not arbitrary. D. Carriers, an ancient weapon. The Nefertari line that refused to move to Mirageois. It's a cross-section of every Void Century mystery we've been cataloguing since Alabasta. And suddenly all those earlier massacres snap into place. Ohara, ordered from above. Bard Valley, vanished from history. Entire islands scrubbed off the map. And the writing has always assumed a hidden sovereign, because that's how the machinery behaves. We just didn't have a name to pin on the flowchart yet, which is why the Lulusia incident is not Oda going too far. That beam, that off-the-map erasure, is the natural payoff of ancient weapon and Void Century foreshadowing we've already walked through. And we need to talk about how that weapon's appearance proves he's been aiming at this exact apocalypse from the very beginning. That apocalypse gets its first test run in the most unsettling way possible. A random Tuesday, Lucia is presented as background noise. A minor kingdom, a tiny Reverie news blip, a little rebellion cover story you skim and move on from. Then Sabo calls. Then everything breaks. Every single week. You remember that sequence. Sabo finally gets through on the line, ready to drop the single worst piece of intel the world government could imagine. He saw someone on the empty throne. He saw Imu. We cut between him, the transponder snails, the panicking Marines, and then blackout. The signal dies. The panel gutters go dark. A shadow crawls over the sky. The clouds warp, and a pillar of light erases Leloucha in one shot. Not destroyed. Not sunk. The map literally updates, and the Gorosei announce the island never existed. Here's the thing. This is the first time Oda actually shows you what ancient weapon power looks like in motion. For 20 plus years, Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus have been this abstract doomsday category. Warship that can destroy an island with a single shot. Being that can control the Sea Kings. Something in the sky. Cool lore, but all vibes. Lulusia is the author cashing that foreshadowing check on screen. A weapon that can target a single island from orbit, off panel, and then have the bureaucracy delete the evidence in the same breath. And he doesn't test it on Alabasta. He doesn't test it on Wano. He tests it on the island you forgot existed. That is intentional. Lucia was built to feel disposable. A small kingdom, some abused citizens, a quick rebellion. Cover story territory, the kind of place fans mentally file under filler adjacent. Then Oda flips the table and says, actually, this is the perfect laboratory to demonstrate a world-ending weapon without derailing the main cast. The horror isn't just the beam though, it's the paperwork. The Gorosei sit there, calm, and say, Lulusia was never there. That one line echoes Ohara's books burning, the Void Centuries missing, 100 years. Every incident that got quietly erased. The weapon destroys the island, the system destroys the memory. Physical annihilation plus narrative censorship. That's the world government's real combo attack. And in the middle of this, Sabo survives. Of course he does. The one guy whose entire revolutionary brand is, I saw what the nobles did and I refused the script, is the one who witnesses Imu, experiences the weapon, and then lives to tell Dragon. This is not a coincidence the way our pattern-seeking monkey brains want everything to be. This is the Revolutionary Army finally being positioned as the counterforce Oda teased when Dragon stood in that East Blue rain and we had no idea who he was. I need you to see how many threads snap together in those pages. Imu's existence. Ancient weapons as real, usable tools. The Reverie fallout. Global information control. Evolutionary intel gathering. All framed in one proof of concept sequence where a nothing island gets removed from reality. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is the payoff of pre-writing. From Lulusia onward, the story stops pretending. We are in open final war setup. The gun is not just on the mantle anymore. It's been fired on a test target, which means the only remaining question is, who's actually in position to shoot back? And for that, we need to talk about how Oda has been building the Revolutionary Army in the background for decades as the only group designed to fight both the weapon and the lie. Because here's the thing. The story doesn't just need someone to shoot back. It needs someone who's been aiming for 20 years of publication. Enter Dragon. Go back to Loguetown and really watch that scene. A mysterious man in a cloak appears out of nowhere. Smoker gets hard stopped. A storm rolls in on command, and then the guy vanishes after saying stuff about destiny. That is not random cool stranger energy. That is, the author already knows this is the protagonist's dad, an ideological opposite to the world government energy. And Oda proves it retroactively with the Garp reveal. Garp drops "oh yeah, that's Luffy's father" in Water 7 with the same tone you'd use to mention you forgot the groceries. That casual reveal only works because Dragon wasn't improvised. The setup was already on the mantelpiece in Loguetown. The name and the family connection were sitting in Oda's notes. From there, watch the drip feed. Robin's Ohara flashback. Dragon's wanted poster is already on the wall, silently telling you this man matters. On a void century scale, then you get scattered reports of revolutionary activity, toppling kingdoms. Baltigo shows up as this hidden HQ in the middle of nowhere. Kuma, a former king turned warlord, is secretly working for Dragon. Ivankov, gag-coded in Impel Down, is suddenly the commander of G2 of the Revolutionary Army. This is not a sin, this is not bad writing, this is in fact how you handle a long game. You normalize the name until it feels inevitable that he's the counterweight to Imu. 1872, Sabo is where the community really underestimates the planning. People say, oh, he was added to make Ace's death hurt more. I need you to stop and look at the structure. The ASL flashback doesn't just give Luffy a third brother. It gives that brother a hatred of nobles, a direct trauma with the Goa Kingdom's class system, and then death by Celestial Dragon Artillery. When Sabo resurfaces as Dragon's chief of staff, that's not a retrofit. That's the author tying Luffy's tiny East Blue tragedy straight into the global rebellion with surgical precision. And every time Oda shows you a kingdom suffering, Dragon's shadow is there. Goa's trash heap, Tequila Wolf's endless bridge, Sorbate's persecution, Dressrosa's toys and slavery. Sometimes the revolutionaries are literally present. Sometimes they're referenced. Sometimes the thematic fingerprints are so loud you can hear Dragon's ideology even when he's off panel. The problem isn't absence, it's restraint. Listen to me. Dragon's speeches about inherited will and the tides of history are not generic rebel flavor text. They are mirrors of the will of D and the void century language. He talks the way Clover talked before the Buster Call. He talks the way Roger talked before Laugh Tale. That puts him in a different category of character. He is not just a guy with an army. He is a man who clearly knows the shape of the erased story, which is why Reverie is the payoff zone he's been orbiting since that Loguetown storm. Sabo infiltrates, Kuma is revealed as a Celestial Dragon's living chair, Cobra confronts the Gorosei and potentially dies for asking Void Century questions. All of Dragon's abstract talk about the world waiting to be overturned suddenly has coordinates and casualties. You can feel the pre-writing snapping into place, and yet Dragon is only one hidden king piece on the board. We still have Joy Boy. We still have Nika. We still have a sun god grin Oda was planting in throwaway panels long before Gear 5 ever existed in the fandom's vocabulary. But we need to talk about how those myths were seeded just as early, and what that means for the ending you think you've already guessed. And if Dragon is the hidden king piece, Joy Boy is the ghost that's been rattling the chain since Skypiea. We just didn't know his name yet. Listen to me. The first time the story actually says Joy Boy out loud is Fishman Island. That apology poneglyph to Poseidon is doing 3 jobs at once. It ties Joy Boy directly to an ancient weapon. It frames him as a guy who made a colossal promise and failed to keep it. And it pins all of that failure in the middle of the Void Century. That is not a random lore dump, but is the author quietly sliding the missing protagonist of the lost history onto the board. And notice how nobody in universe treats the name as mysterious. Robin reads it, Neptune reacts, and the vibe is, this is that guy. Oda doesn't stop the story to explain Joy Boy to you. He writes it as if historians already have a category for this dude. That's deliberate. That means that before chapter 1, in the world's textbooks you never see, Joy Boy is already a known variable. Here's the thing. Once you have that name, Skypiea retroactively stops being a quirky detour and starts reading like a Joy Boy rehearsal. You have a giant straw hat silhouette in Mariager later, but thematically it's already there in the man who will carry our song to the ends of the world. You have a bell that must be rung so a message can cross the sky and reach someone waiting on the sea. You have an ancient promise between sky people and blue sea people that went unfulfilled for centuries until the right idiot with a straw hat shows up and inherits the will. That is the Joy Boy pattern before Joy Boy is even introduced. By the time we hit Zu and Wano, the mask is basically off. Zunisha doesn't talk about Joy Boy as a one-and-done historical celebrity. It talks about Joy Boy as something that will return. The people of Wano speak in prophecy terms. Not remember that guy, but when that one comes again. This is mythic cycle storytelling. It's not a name drop. It's a job title, which is why Kaido's obsession is so important. You couldn't be Joy Boy either. That line only works if Oda already has a clear definition in his notes of what counts as Joy Boy. Kaido is literally running auditions for a role the story hasn't properly explained yet. That is pre-writing, not improv. And behind all of this sits the D-Clan and the Ancient Kingdom. Whether Joy Boy was its king or its champion almost doesn't matter. Functionally, his will is now fragmented into the D-Carriers and etched into the Poneglyph network. The Lost Monarch's ideology gets broken into bloodlines and stone, which sets up the last twist in this braid. Joy Boy, the historical figure, Nika, the mythic symbol, Luffy, the current inheritor. 3 layers, 1 through line. And we need to talk about how Nika was seeded long before Gear 5 ever bounced onto the page. So when Nika finally gets named and Gear 5 drops, a chunk of the community went, "Okay, Oda snapped. This is a last-minute gag power-up. None of this was planned. I need you to hear how wild that sounds in a story where the author literally decided the final panel before Chapter 1. We need to stop calling every surprise a retcon just because we didn't have the vocabulary for it yet." Here's the thing. Oda has been screaming Sun equals liberation at us for decades. The Sun Pirates brand? It's not just a cool logo. It's Fisher Tiger burning off the hoof of a celestial dragon and replacing it with a sun so former slaves can exist without a barcode. That's not a random design choice. That's the concept of the sun as a countermark to oppression. Then you go to Fishman Island and see sun flags everywhere. The whole community literally hiding their trauma behind a symbol of warmth, light and freedom. That's Nika's silhouette before the name. Skypiea doubles down. You've got Luffy's shadow cast against the sun as he rings the golden bell. You've got constant drum imagery around the Shandian's rituals. And you've got this idiot rubber boy whose fighting style is already rubber hose cartoon physics in a world of serious swordsmen and laser beams. Everyone else gets cool powers. Luffy gets balloon gags, Looney Tunes recoil, and the most comedic elasticity in the series. That tonal dissonance? That's intentional writing, not an accident. And the text keeps nudging you. Over and over, people call Luffy the man who brings smiles, the guy who makes others laugh even in hell. At Arlong Park, his grin while he smashes the map room is the crack in Nami's chains. In Alabasta, he collapses in the sand, still joking, and suddenly the war princess is laughing again. Enies lobby, he declares war on the world government. And what does the crew do? They laugh and jump. Dressrosa, the birdcage falls, and the first thing you see is people smiling through tears. Wano literally has a country that forgot how to laugh as a premise, and the solution is a sun god-coded buffoon whose laughter breaks reality. So when Who's Who starts muttering about a slave legend, a sun god who brings joy and freedom, that is not an info dump. That is Oda finally putting a label on a pattern he's been running since Fisher Tiger. It's the moment the myth catches up to the symbol work. Gear 5's design is the same story. The white silhouette, the drums of liberation, the exaggerated squash and stretch straight out of 1930s animation, even the way sound effects wrap around Luffy's body. This is Oda cashing in 20 years of drawing Luffy as a walking cartoon in a semi-grounded world. He never wanted edgy power-up number 27. He wanted cartoon God of Freedom from day one. Tie that to Joy Boy and the Ancient Kingdom, and it snaps into place. The world government isn't just terrified of a dude, they're terrified of an idea. The laughing sun that says no one owns you. That idea has been haunting the story since Arlong Park. And if you think that's where the planning stops, listen to me. We're about to zoom out and look at how even the goofy cover stories and background gags have been quietly building entire future arcs and organizations while you were busy arguing about retcons. And here's where I need you to admit something a little embarrassing with me. A huge chunk of this community literally skipped an entire second manga Oda has been publishing in the margins for 2 decades. I'm talking about the cover story serials, not just cute pin-ups, actual, short, serialized mini arcs that run on the chapter covers following side characters after their main arc ends. You get a title, you get Chapter 3 so-and-so's misadventures, and week by week Oda is advancing their storyline while you're flipping past it to get to Luffy punching somebody. This is not a sin. This is normal. Most shonen authors use covers for fan service or jokes. The problem is that in One Piece, those mini arcs are not cosmetic. They're foreshadowing infrastructure. They are where Oda parks future villains, allies, and entire plot devices until he's ready to drag them back into the main stage. Take Hachi. In Arlong Park, he's a goofy octopus henchman. Then he gets a whole cover story about escaping, wandering, opening a takoyaki stand. Years pass, hundreds of chapters. And then, when we hit Sabaody, who is the emotional entry point for the Fishman discrimination plot, and Kami's kidnapping, that same octopus, now morally recontextualized and already living in the exact area Oda needs. That's not coincidence. That is an author who planned a re-entry route years in advance and used the covers as the delivery system. Same pattern with Enel. Skypiea ends, and instead of disappearing into villain limbo, he gets Enel's great space operations. On the moon, we see ancient ruins, automata, a mural of winged people that screens Void Century and Ancient Kingdom without saying either. That cover serial ran in the mid-300s. We are now in the 1,000-plus chapter range, and only recently have the space, ancient weapon and forgotten civilization threads started to feel central again. That is a decade-plus time bomb ticking away in what most fans assumed was a gag about lightning god astronauts. Caribou? Same deal. Its cover story has him captured in Wano territory, overhearing a certain Poseidon detail and muttering about telling that person. Years later, he resurfaces in Wano proper, and suddenly his stupid swamp body is a vector for ancient weapons information. Beggy's cover story charts his rise after Marineford, quietly repositioning him from gag supernova to credible Yonko assassination co-conspirator before Whole Cake even starts. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet, their entire post-Dressrosa movements are documented through cover serials so that when they inevitably matter again, Oda doesn't have to stop the main plot to explain where they've been. And then you have the villain reorg sagas. Baroque Works agents scattered and arrested, the covers track where they end up, so Oda can later pull Mr. 2 or Mr. 3 out of Impel down with receipts. CP9's fall from Eni's lobby, the cover story shows them training back up, re-establishing bonds, paving the road for their eventual Cypher Pole reshuffle. Buggy's crew, we literally watch their misadventures, which sets up Buggy's whole accidental legend status when he becomes a warlord and then a Yonko. While you're focused on Marineford, he's quietly future-proofing the clown. Here's the thing. Structurally, this only works if there's a macro outline. You don't send Enel to the moon on a whim if you don't already have a folder labeled Space/Ancient Kingdom/Weapons in your brain, or more realistically in your notes. You don't seed Hachi's redemption path 4 years before Sabaody, unless you know you're doing Sabaody and Fishman Island and the racism plot. So while we were arguing on forums about whether the cover art with Luffy eating meat was symbolic, Oda was running a parallel foreshadowing machine in plain sight. And listen to me, it's not just cover stories. the background gags, the fake brand logos, the throwaway SBS answers you skim at 2 a.m., those are doing the same job. And we need to talk about how deep that rabbit hole goes. So when you flip the page and hit the SBS Shitsumono Boshu Suru, Oda's I'm Taking Questions corner, you think you're getting a breather. Dumb jokes, cursed drawings, the community collectively asking about boobs. Every single week. This is fine. This is normal. But listen to me. That chaotic mailbag is one of the most weaponized foreshadowing tools in the entire series. On the surface, it's nonsense. Oda doodles toddler versions of the Shichibukai for a gag. Everyone laughs. You move on. Except years later, those joke designs turn out to match actual childhood flashbacks and official heights and ages that line up perfectly with the timeline. That's not a meme. That's documentation. You don't accidentally keep Mihawk's build, Doflamingo's proportions, and Hancock's silhouette consistent over a decade unless you already have their life charts written down somewhere. Here's the thing. The SBS is where Oda can say the quiet part out loud while pretending he's just riffing. Fans ask, how tall is everyone? And he drops full height charts and ages. At the time, it feels trivia tier. Later, when we're reconstructing the Ohara incident, the God Valley timeline, or the ages of the Rock's generation, those numbers suddenly matter. The author didn't improvise that consistency. He published the spreadsheet in joke format. Same with races. Years before Lunarians are a plot device, he's answering questions about wings and fire and special races in SBS, teasing that certain people are the last of their kind. He's casually confirming interbreeding rules between humans, giants and fishmen. On first read, it's just world-building flavour. Then King shows up. Big Mom starts hunting rare races, and you realise those throwaway answers were the fine print for the entire Toto land and Onigashima conflict. And then we get into Devil Fruits. Long before Dressrosa and Wano turn Awakening into a central category of the power system, Oda is in SBS carefully explaining that powers can grow, that the same fruit can reincarnate into a nearby object, that there are deeper forms he can't talk about yet. He's not brainstorming in real time. He's slow-rolling a rulebook he already wrote. The foreshadowing isn't just in the manga panels, it's in the margins. We need to talk about the character teases too. Oda jokes in SBS that Sanji's family situation is complicated and that there's a reason for his wanted poster being weird. Years later, Whole Cake Island detonates that into the Vinsmoke reveal. He hints that Zoro's hometown and sword connections are important long before Wano reframes his entire lineage. At the time, you read it at 2 a.m., chuckle and move on. Then 20 years later, you feel like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast going, "He told us, he literally told us." This is why the Oda is just making it up argument falls apart. You cannot keep hundreds of joke answers, stats, hometowns, devil fruit mechanics, and racial details perfectly aligned with future canon for 2 decades by accident. That's not coincidence. That's pre-writing with a clown nose on. The main story plays it straight. The SBS plays it off. Together, they're one system. And if he's willing to hide real lore in fan mail jokes, what do you think he's doing with actual drawings? Because the visual foreshadowing, the background silhouettes, the panel compositions, the recurring symbols, that's where this gets genuinely terrifying. Because the visual foreshadowing, the background silhouettes, the panel compositions, the recurring symbols, that's where this gets genuinely terrifying. In One Piece, the background is never just background. It is not empty space. It is an extension of the outline document. Oda's assistants are not just filling panels. They're basically leaking redacted future chapters straight into the margins years before you're supposed to understand them. You flip past it in 0.3 seconds. 10 years later, it's suddenly, how was this here the whole time? Here's the thing. Those early silhouettes of the Shichibukai, the Admirals, the Yonko, that is not vibes. That is not a vague blob that he'll figure out later. Go back to Marineford, Sabaudi, even Jaya. The hats, coats, body shapes, weapons, they line up almost perfectly with the eventual designs. Kuma's bulk, Doflamingo's feathers, Akanu's cap and jawline. You are not accidentally drawing Big Mom's outline that consistently across multiple appearances unless the author already has the character sheet taped above the desk. And it's not just people, it's symbols. The sun motif that keeps stalking Luffy from Skypiea murals to Dardan's flag, to random background doodles in cover stories, turns out to be tied to Nika, to the Sun Pirates, to an entire persecuted race of Lunarians whose design revolves around flames and wings. Feathers on Doflamingo, wings on Skypiea residents, the fire imagery around Ace and Sabo, the literal sun brand on Fisher Tiger's freed slaves. The community didn't invent that pattern. Oda did, intentionally, over decades. Wanted posters and newspapers are another weapon. Early on, they're just gags and world building. Then you realise those tiny mugshots in a corner panel were Blackbeard's crew, revolutionary commanders, future supernovas quietly existing in the story before their introduction arc. You saw them. You just didn't know you saw them. That's not retrofitting, that's pre-writing, delivered as background texture. Same with environmental details, random ships in a harbour that later belonged to relevant crews. Flags of unknown nations at the Reverie that only get named hundreds of chapters later. Background slaves in Mariejo who visually echo Fishman Island designs or Kuma's silhouette, paying off in the revelation of the Pacifista program and the Celestial Dragon slave system. I need you to understand how much discipline it takes to keep drawing those elements consistently when most fans will never zoom in. You cannot cheat this. You cannot in 2023 decide, oh, that blob from 2008 was actually Kaido. The printing presses already ran. The tankobon already shipped. For this category of foreshadowing, the only way it works is if there is a reference Bible, a model sheet archive, and a long-term design plan that everyone on the team obeys. This is not a sin. This is not abnormal. This is, in fact, how you do coherent, long-form visual storytelling. And once you see it, you start rereading and rewatching panels the way a conspiracy theorist reads tax law. We need to, honestly. Because the next layer isn't visual at all. The next layer is structural. Parallel arcs, mirrored character journeys. Entire sagas that quietly forecast the shape of the final conflict. If the background art is the margin notes, the structure is the thesis, and that's where we're going next. When I say the structure is the thesis, I mean it very literally. Oda didn't just plan plot points, he planned the shape of the entire series. Two halves, two seas. East Blue versus the New World, Paradise versus the Nightmare after the Red Line. The early arcs aren't random adventures, they're prototypes. Tutorial levels for the real thing. Here's the thing, once you see that, you can't unsee it. Alabasta is the Desert Kingdom in crisis. Dressrosa is that same scenario run on New Game Plus with all the DLC installed. You get a warlord puppet ruler in Crocodile manipulating a rebellion through scarcity and misinformation. Then you jump to Doflamingo, another warlord puppet ruler, but now he's a fallen celestial dragon, plugged directly into Mary Geoways, trafficking toys that are secretly slaves, and hardwiring the Void Sentry into the background with the Dressrosa Tontata history. Same skeleton. That is intentional foreshadowing through parallel design. The author is telling you, this category of conflict, this structure of corrupt ruler versus oppressed kingdom versus Straw Hats, it's coming back, and every time the scope will widen. Early on, you're watching Vivi struggle to save a single country. By the time you hit Dressrosa, that same pattern is quietly teaching you how a global system of oppression is going to work in the final war. Eni's lobby to Onigashima is the same trick, just cranked even higher. In Eni's lobby, the crew storms a government stronghold, declares war on the world government with a flag burn, and centers the whole arc on Robin's I want to live. Personal survival against an abstract system. In Onigashima, they storm a Yonko stronghold, but the subtext is national revolution, closed borders, and centuries of isolation. Instead of one woman begging to exist, You have Yamato yelling that he wants to live free as Odin, and Momonosuke deciding to open Wano's borders, which is basically hitting confirm on a geopolitical nuke. Fishman Island is Arlong Park, run at national scale. Same racism, same sun symbol, same question of whether humans and fishmen can coexist. Except now the sun mark is tied to Fisher Tiger, to the slaves of Mary Joyce, to the ancient weapon Poseidon, to Joy Boy's broken promise, and to a literal prophecy of Luffy's arrival. Arlong is no longer just a bad guy. He's a symptom of a centuries-long disease the story has been hinting at since before chapter 200. I need you to understand, this is not a sin. And this is not lazy repetition. This is escalation as foreshadowing. Oda is training you. He runs you through Save the Village, then Save the Kingdom, so when we hit Save the World from the same core injustices, your brain already knows the pattern and can focus on the payoff. This is fine. This is normal. Good long-form writing does this on purpose. And listen to me, it's not just arcs. Character journeys are mirrored the same way. Early Luffy declaring he'll be Pirate King, Zoro swearing to be the greatest swordsman, Sanji chasing all blue. Those aren't just dreams, they're structural promises. Their flaws and goals in East Blue are the prototype versions of their endgame roles in that final world-scale conflict. Which means if you really want to see where Oda is going, we need to zoom in on those character blueprints next. But when I say character blueprints, I'm not being poetic. I mean the dreams themselves are pre-written job descriptions for the Final Saga. Luffy wants to be Pirate King. Zoro, world's greatest swordsman. Nami, a map of the world. Usopp, a brave warrior of the sea. Angie, the all blue. Chopper, a cure for all diseases. Robin, the true history. Frankie, a dream ship that sails to the end. Brook, to reunite with Laboon. Jinbe, equality between humans and fishmen. That reads sentimental. It isn't. It's logistical. Those aren't just goals, they're a checklist of endgame requirements. You want to reach the final island and then actually do something with what you find? You need someone who can literally survive anything and keep moving. Luffy. Someone whose ship won't die halfway through the apocalypse. Frankie. Someone who can sail through a world-scale natural disaster. Nami. And someone who can navigate the social fallout when the sky actually falls. Jinbe. Chopper. This is not a random assortment of dreamers. This is a raid party. And Robin is the easiest one to prove. From her first real introduction, her dream is stapled to the Void Century, Poneglyphs, and the true history the world government is terrified of. That's not vague, I want to be strong energy. That is, from day one, hardwired into the central mystery. One Piece, the Ancient Kingdom, Joy Boy. When fans pretend the author is just winging it, I need you to remember that Oda put the literal key to the puzzle on the crew before Alabasta ended, then spent 2 decades slowly turning that key. Here's the thing, Nami's dream is even nastier as foreshadowing because it pretends to be soft. Map the whole world sounds achievable until you remember the world is deliberately unmappable. 4 seas, split by a ground line and a red line that physically block circumnavigation. You cannot complete that map unless the geography changes. Either the walls come down, the seas merge, or the entire planetary structure gets rewritten. Nami's dream is a spoiler for a post-finale world order. Sanji's All Blue is the same prophecy in a chef's hat. All the seas meeting, every fish in one place. Fans treat it as a cute cooking side quest. No, that's a tectonic event. For All Blue to exist, the barriers between blues have to collapse or be bypassed on a permanent global scale. It's a world structure patch note disguised as a menu item. Then you have Jinbe and Chopper, and this is where the emotional stuff fuses with the political. Jinbe's equality dream is not just end racism, yay. It's tailored to the moment after the truth comes out. Celestial dragons exposed, slavery receipts public. Who negotiates between humans and the people they literally trafficked? The ex-warlord Fishman Helmsman, who's been carrying that theme since Arlong Park. Chopper's cure all diseases, reads childish until you remember the series already plays with weaponized illness, biological warfare, and entire islands ruined by medical neglect. After the final war, you don't just need a doctor, you need a symbol that says we're going to fix what we broke. And hanging over all of this, you still have Zoro, Usopp, Brook, their dreams and even their gags. Zoro's trash sense of direction in a story about reorienting the world. Usopp's lies that keep accidentally coming true. Brook's 50-year promise to a whale we met in East Blue. Those aren't just jokes. They're long-term foreshadowing tools, which is where we need to go next. The designs, the running gags, the throwaway bits that stopped being throwaway the second you hit Wano. But once you notice that, you can't unsee it. In One Piece, the punchline is never just a punchline. If something keeps coming back as a gag, you should be suspicious. You should be treating every dumb joke panel as a crime scene, because Oda has a long history of turning "ha ha funny" into "oh god, he planned this" 10 years later. Here's the thing. Usopp is the purest version of this. Usopp is not just a liar. Usopp is a walking prophecy machine disguised as a clown. Early on, he screams about commanding 8,000 men. It's a joke. The villagers roll their eyes. We move on. Cut to Dressrosa, and this man, this nose, is literally worshipped by thousands as goddess soup, leading a small army of freed toys and gladiators. The number is exaggerated. The spirit is dead on. The lie was the foreshadowing. Same pattern with the giant goldfish. In Syrup Village, he brags about defeating a goldfish so huge its poop is the size of an island. That is not a normal sentence. Years later, in Little Garden, we meet the Island Eater, a giant goldfish whose poop is so big it forms islands. The community calls this Usopp's lies coming true as a meme. I need you to understand this as an authorial strategy. This is Oda deliberately encoding future material inside a bit. He does it again with the Island of Dwarves. It's just another tall tale until Dressrosa hands us Tontata Kingdom, a literal island of dwarves, and Usopp ends up their hero. He claims he'll be a brave warrior of the sea. Post-time skip, he unlocks observation haki, snipes sugar from a mile away. The pattern conditions you. You start reading Usopp's lies as a meta-spoiler tag. When he lies, Oda is quietly saying, file this under, will matter later. And once you see that, you realize it's not just Usopp. Zoro's garbage sense of direction is funny, sure, but it keeps walking him into plot-critical spaces he shouldn't reach. Every single week, Thriller Bark, Sabaody, Wano's castle corridors, the man is a magnet for important rooms. Sanji's chivalry gag does the same thing. The fact that he refuses to hit women is not just a character quirk, it's a structural device that keeps putting him next to Nami, Robin, Pudding, Reiju, the exact women who carry core secrets of the story. Luffy's idiocy? Same category. He looks stupid. This is fine. This is normal. But his dumb gut reads keep landing perfectly on trustworthy allies and hidden villains. That isn't random. That's pre-written intuition disguised as comedy. Brook is the darker version. Every skull joke, every casual "I'm already dead" starts as morbid slapstick. Then you hit Thriller Bark, Laboon, and eventually the creeping endgame with death, memory, souls, and whatever the hell Imu is, and you realize Brook has been the friendly face of the afterlife the whole time. Weaponizing comedy as prophecy is why One Piece feels cohesive. Nothing is throwaway, because any gag can be retroactively slotted into the master plan. And if even the jokes are planned, then the final war, the matchups, the alliances, those have been hiding in plain sight too. We need to lay those out next. If even the fart jokes are coordinated, then the war to end the series was never going to be improv jazz. It was going to be a symphony, conducted 27 years in advance. So let's put everyone on the board. You've got the Straw Hats and their grand fleet, the Yonko crews, the Marines, the world government with Imu sitting on top, the Revolutionary Army, the shattered remnants of the Shichibukai, the worst generation, and then the wild card category. Whoever ends up holding the ancient weapons, that's not a messy pile of factions. That's a bracket. And Oda has been seeding the bracket for ages. The Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance isn't just a cool poster shot. It's Oda test driving what a multinational anti-world government coalition looks like. The Straw Hat Grand Fleet? That's your proof of concept for a pirate army that can answer a single call. Blackbeard's crew gathering powers and prisons? That's the anti-Luffy, an intentional dark mirror end boss. Inside the Marines, you've got Sword on one side, CP0 on the other, proving the Justice faction is already cracking before the real quake hits. And Whitebeard told you this was coming. A war that will engulf the entire world. Once someone finds the One Piece. That line at Marineford is not dramatic flair, it's a mission statement. Pair that with Dragon literally building a revolutionary army. The Reverie blowing up the Shichibukai system and destabilizing kingdoms, and the slow reintroduction of ancient weapons through Shirahoshi, Pluton in Wano, and whatever Uranus is. The author isn't hinting at random chaos. He's describing a coordinated global conflict machine. Here's the thing, even the map is foreshadowing. Raftel/Laughtail is at the very end of the Grand Line. Mary Joie is on top of the red line. Fishman Island is under the red line. If you follow the implications of destroy the red line or unite the seas, those three locations are forced into the same narrative choke point. You don't get Sanji's All Blue, Nami's complete map, and Luffy's promise to protect Fishman Island unless the geography itself gets rewritten on panel. Shirahoshi as Poseidon, Joy Boy's apology, the prophecy of his return, Nami's dream, Sanji's dream, Luffy's promise, these are not separate side quests. They're all different camera angles on one event, a war that literally reshapes the world's oceans and power structure. When the seas connect, Fishman Island is no longer under anyone's boot. When the red line falls, Mary Wife falls with it. When the world is one ocean, All Blue stops being a metaphor. I need you to see how unfairly clean this is. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is pre-writing. The only way all these independent seeds converge this neatly is if Oda had a rough blueprint of that final war and world change before he ever drew Luffy in a barrel. Detail shift, sure. This is fine. This is normal. But the trajectory? Unchanged. And we're not done. Because once you accept the blueprint exists, the next question is obvious. Who actually fights who? Who dies? And how early did Oda tell us? As in the next chunk, we're getting petty. Matchups, likely casualties, and the ending One Piece has been promising since East Blue. And we're not done, because there's one character Oda slow-rolled so hard the community still can't agree when he actually entered the story. Joy Boy. On Fishman Island, Joy Boy shows up as this random apology carved into a poneglyph. Tragic, distant, super historical. The way it's presented, your brain files it under new lore drop. Ancient guy. Failed promise. Moving on. But listen to me. That is fake new info. That's not the beginning of a mystery. That's the midpoint reveal of a setup Oda had been humming in the background for years through tone, themes, and world building. Think about what we already had before Fishman Island. The Void Century is a black hole in history. The ancient weapons are world-ending tools scattered across the globe. Noah is a literal ark sitting under an island that's obsessed with the sun and the surface. None of that is random decor. That's a narrative cluster. Void Century plus weapons plus arc equals someone tried to save the world once and it went horribly wrong. When the Poneglyph suddenly says, "Dear Fishman Island, sorry I couldn't keep my promise. Signed, Joy Boy." Oda is just slapping a name tag on the silhouette that's been standing in the doorway since Alabasta. Here's the thing. Once you accept Joy Boy as the original Pirate of Freedom template, everything snaps. The ancient weapons stop being generic nukes and become the tools of liberation that were misused. Noah stops being a weird set piece and becomes the vehicle for a promised migration to the sun. The Void Century stops being vague tragedy and becomes the story of the first Luffy who tried to punch God and lost. And then you look at Luffy. I need you to notice how much of Joy Boy we were already watching without the name. A kid who makes impossible promises and then structures his whole life around keeping them. A guy who apologizes with his entire body when he fails, but never surrenders the dream they've left in the face of tragedy so hard that entire nations catch it. Fishman Island explicitly parallels his vow to protect the island with Joy Boy's broken promise to the mermaid princess. That's not coincidence. That's intentional mirroring. Even the gags are doing work. Luffy promising not to cause trouble and immediately wrecking everything. Luffy ringing the ox bell to apologize to the world by declaring war again. That's Joy Boy energy, reframed as comedy until you realize the author has been training you to associate this pattern promise failure, louder promise with one bloodline of idiots who refuse to bow. So when Wano finally says, hey, Luffy is inheriting Joy Boy's will, maybe even his identity through this goofy Nika fruit, that's not a late retcon. That's the payoff to decades of myth building around the man who brings dawn and inherited dreams. The fruit, the drums, the laughter, those are just the special effects on a roll the story already built. And if Joy Boy, the supposed mystery of the deep lore, was planned as a punchline from the start, then we need to talk about the actual title of the series. Because there is no universe where Oda pre-writes Joy Boy to this degree and then decides the One Piece itself on a Tuesday. Next, we're opening the vault on the treasure he's been writing towards since chapter 1. So let's talk about the actual treasure, because this is where the community has fully lost the plot. There is this persistent undead theory that the One Piece is just the friends we made along the way. And listen to me, Oda has personally walked into the room, seen that theory on the whiteboard, and erased it in front of everyone. He has said repeatedly that the One Piece is real, that it's a physical treasure. He jokes that if it ended on friendship, his readers would kill him. That's not a casual comment. That's an author boxing himself in on purpose. You don't go on record nuking the easiest cop-out ending unless you already know exactly what you're protecting. This is not a sin. This is not arrogance. This is pre-writing defensive measures. Now, look at how Laugh Tale is framed in the Roger flashbacks. The crew reaches the final island. They see the treasure, they read the history, and they burst out laughing. Oda has Roger literally say they learned the entire history of the world. So whatever the One Piece is, it's not just a chest of gold you trip over in a dungeon. It's tangible and informational at the same time. A thing you can touch and a truth you can understand. And then Roger drops the line that they arrived too early. That's huge. That means the treasure isn't just a reward, it's a mechanism that requires timing. A system waiting for the right era, the right pirate, the right global conditions. If you're still picturing a random pile of riches, I need you to update the picture in your head. Here's the thing. Oda has been quietly building a category of objects that do exactly this. Poneglyphs that form a global network of data storage. Ancient weapons that can reshape seas and nations. A world map that is clearly broken. A single red line slicing the planet, and a grand line looping it. From East Blue, he's been nudging you toward a world-scale puzzle, not a Dragon Ball scavenger hunt. So when you connect those dots, the One Piece starts to look less treasure chest and more master key. Something that interfaces with the Poneglyph network, activates or controls the ancient weapons, and literally rewrites the sea level status quo. A device, a system, a trigger that can turn the world of pirates into the world of one sea. Fans saying maybe it's just vibes are underselling 27 years of extremely on-the-nose geography foreshadowing, and of course the title, One Piece. The treasure that brings the world together. The story about tearing down the borders that keep people separated. You can call me a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. This is fine, this is normal, but at some point the repetition stops being coincidence and becomes design. Which means Oda didn't just plan a twist, he planned an end state. And next, we need to zoom in on how he's been hiding that end state in plain sight through recurring symbols and visual motifs you've been staring at for decades without realizing what they were pointing to. So here's the thing. Oda isn't just hiding answers in dialogue. He's hiding them in the drawings you scroll past on your reread because your brain goes, oh cool sun rays. Listen to me. The art is screaming at you. Start with the sun, the dawn, The chains. Every time Luffy is framed against a rising sun in East Blue, every time you see those exaggerated sunburst panels when he yells about freedom that's not just shone an optimism filter, then you hit Skypiea and suddenly there's an actual sun god, a drumbeat, a silhouette dancing in the sky. Fishman Island, the promise of the sun, a literal sun flag freeing slaves from chains, an ancient prophecy of a man who will bring dawn. Wano, the country of night waiting for dawn. Kozaki crests shaped like suns. Prisoners in Udon breaking chains as the sun rises behind Luffy's Gear 4 silhouette. These are not random vibes. This is a visual language for liberation, an ancient promise that quietly points back to Joy Boy and Nika long before Gear 5 ever grinned at you. And then there's the negative space, the shadows, the silhouettes. Oda keeps drawing ghosts of future monsters and refusing to show you the face. Emu is literally introduced as a walking censorship bar, all black ink and empty eyes on the empty throne. The Gorosei spend decades as featureless old guys in shadow, but always framed dead center, always above the world map, so your brain files them under final boss importance, even when their designs aren't locked yet. Dragon stands on a rooftop in Loguetown, coat flapping, face half obscured by smoke. Shanks in Chapter 1 gets that iconic backshot with the straw hat and the coastline. That's not shyness. That's an author keeping the design flexible while nailing the narrative category. These people matter, you just don't know how yet. Now, I need you to appreciate how rude it is that even the jokes are working overtime. Luffy stretching his arms into big circular poses, hands flung wide, body forming a human sunburst. Initially a gag, a way to sell the rubber goofball energy. In retrospect, it's the body language of a literal sun god in waiting. Zoro's cross-shaped scars and constant crucifix imagery at Whiskey Peak and Thriller Bark, comedy tough guy martyrdom that later folds into his role as the straw-hatted demon who bears the world's pain. Nami's little weather doodles, her obsession with mapping currents and clouds, her staff gags that bonk people with wind and rain. Those visual bits are the scaffolding for a future climate goddess who weaponizes the sky. And the backgrounds are snitching. Those crowded spreads and cover pages the community treats as wallpaper, that's Oda's whiteboard. Future islands hinted in travel spreads, ships that later sail into the plot, characters who cameo in covers years before they walk on stage. He plants the world map and the cast expansion in the margins, then spends a decade zooming in, which means if the panels are lying to you, the punchlines are lying even harder. Next, we need to talk about how those harmless running gags are actually time bombs waiting to go off in your face. Oda's favourite trick is making you laugh at something for 500 chapters and then turning that same joke into a knife. You thought you were in on it, you thought you were smarter than the gag, and then suddenly you're crying over the punchline. That is not accidental rhythm. That's structural planning wearing a clown nose. Start with the most blatant case study, Usopp. On day one, this man is a compulsive liar, a walking gag, giants, enormous goldfish, a country of tiny people. He just keeps stacking nonsense. Except, every single one of those nonsense lies is a future travel itinerary. Elbafar exists. The giant goldfish exists. The dwarves exist. His throwaway dream of becoming a brave warrior of the sea isn't just character flavour, it's a mission statement the author is quietly obligated to fulfill. That's not the community hallucinating patterns in toast. That is an author using comedy as a catalogue of planned destinations and long-term character foreshadowing. Here's the thing. When a joke keeps mutating into canon geography and power progression, we have crossed out of coincidence territory. Usopp's lies are an outline. They map his arc from fraud to profit, from the boy who makes stories up to the man whose stories keep coming true. You don't get that many hits by accident over 27 years. You get it by pre-writing the world and then disguising your roadmap as a bit. Isanji is the more perverse version of the same technique. Nosebleeds, horny cook, running gag. This is fine, this is normal, until Fishman Island turns that gag into a literal medical crisis. The joke escalates across the arc, then suddenly we're in a blood donor subplot where Sanji's chronic nosebleeds become a life-threatening problem and a key logistical hurdle. Fans love to file this under retrofit. And sure, maybe Oda didn't have the exact transfusion scene storyboarded in Baratie, but the category matters less than the consistency. He had a persistent comedic trait on the books and then weaponized it at scale. That's intentional storytelling discipline. Luffy's I'm Gonna Be Pirate King works the same way but on a mythic register. Early on, it's a meme, background noise, the dumb kid who won't shut up. Then you hit Sabaody, Marineford, Wano, and suddenly Rayleigh, Whitebeard, Kaido are taking that sentence dead seriously. The repetition hasn't changed, the context has. A running gag becomes a prophecy the world itself is forced to acknowledge, which is exactly how you write a destiny that feels earned instead of cheap. And it's everywhere. Chopper's monster form starts as horror comedy body horror, then gets refiled as a core power-up he has to master. Brook's endless skeleton jokes, all the skull gags and I'm already dead, turn out to be armor over a story about time, loss, and being the only one who kept waiting. Buggy is introduced as a literal clown, the community's favourite punching bag, and ends up a Yonko, whose joke persona is the perfect camouflage for how the system actually works. One or two of these, sure, coincidence. This many, over this span, in this pattern? No. Listen to me. When gags keep detonating into plot, you're looking at time bombs. And Oda doesn't only hide the explosives in dialogue. Next, we need to talk about the ones he buries in the margins. In cover stories, SBS answers, and background panels you scroll past at 3 a.m. Cover stories are where most manga go to nap. Traditionally, they're palate cleansers. A goofy sketch, a mascot doing taxes, something the author tosses in so the volume doesn't look barren. This is normal. This is fine. Except Oda looks at that same space and goes, what if I ran a second, quieter manga in the margins and used it to foreshadow world-shaking events? Here's the thing. In One Piece, the cover stories are not filler. They're parallel narrative tracks. They introduce characters, organizations, even entire regions that then crash back into the main story years later. And if you skipped them because you were speed reading on a scan site at 3 a.m., you just missed plot. Not vibes, plot. Let's start with the most infamous example, Ino on the Moon. On paper, that premise sounds like a meme the community would invent as a joke. What if the lightning rod just went to space? But Oda actually draws it. Enel rides his Arc Maxim into the sky, ends up on the moon, discovers ancient automata, ruins and murals that quietly imply a lunar civilization that migrated down to the blue planet. No exposition dump, no narrator box screaming void concentric lore, just visual data, winged people, ships leaving the moon, a city that looks suspiciously connected to Shandora, Burka, Skypiea. If this were a one-off gag, fine, but those same motifs, ancient robots, skyfolk, a lost high-tech society, keep reappearing in Egghead, in the world's origin conversations, in how Vegapunk frames the land of the gods. That's not retrofitting. That's the author running Void Century pre-writing in a format most fans treat as optional. Now, zoom back down from the moon to the bureaucrats. The CP9 cover story doesn't just show what the losers are up to. It tracks their escape, their injuries, the world government's reaction, and their eventual recruitment by Lucci into CP0. When they walk back into the story as masked assassins at Reverie, Oda doesn't have to waste chapters explaining how they survived. He already did the paperwork, in cover form. Same category with Baroque works. Mr. 2's Impel Down Loyalty, Mr. 3's Survival, Crocodile's repositioning as a potential ally in the New World. All of that groundwork is laid through side material that recontextualizes them from one-arc villains into long-term players. Caribou's cover story goes even harder. You watch this absolute swamp goblin stumble into a revolutionary cell, reveal knowledge about Poseidon, and get in proximity to Drake and Kaido's forces. Then, when he resurfaces in Wano, His weird little side quest suddenly matters. I need you to see the pattern. These aren't random epilogues. They're Oda's background processing. While the main narrative is focused on Luffy's current island, the author is quietly moving pieces on the global board so that when the story naturally needs a prison break ally, a government hit squad, or a slimeball who knows about ancient weapons, they already exist with documented history. You do not get that density of foreshadowing by winging it month to month. You only run a second serialized narrative in the gutters if you already know the destination of the first one. And if Oda is willing to hide plot in literal page corners, listen to me, you better believe he's also hiding it in Q&A jokes, which means next we need to talk about the SBS. So when Oda hides plot in page gutters, that's already deranged, but the SBS is worse. The SBS is weaponized derangement. It's a Q&A corner where readers send in cursed drawings and bizarre questions, and Oda answers in this chaotic gremlin persona. It feels random. It feels unfiltered. And here's the thing, it absolutely is not. Because Oda chooses every question that gets printed. He curates the chaos. He decides which joke gives him cover to soft launch a mechanic 10 years early. When he riffs on devil fruits, or tosses off a detail about some obscure race. That's not just banter. That's the author using a fake clown mask to talk shop about a very real, very planned endgame. Take Wano. Long before the arc, he's in SBS talking about samurai from a closed-off country in the New World, sketching what Zoro would look as a samurai from Wano, answering questions about a land of swordsmen that flat out did not exist on the page yet. At the time, it reads as fan service doodling. In hindsight, it's a man who already has the Wano outline on his desk, stress testing aesthetics and terminology in the margins. Same category with races. Years before Totoland, he's answering SBS questions about giants, long arms, long legs, fishmen, minks, casually confirming that these aren't one-off designs but formal races with histories. He even drops hints about interbreeding and discrimination. Then Whole Cake rolls around and suddenly the plot hinges on Big Mom's obsession with a family of every race. That's not coincidence. That's pre-writing leaking through the comedy. Devil fruits are another goldmine. Oda uses SBS to clarify rules that, at the time, seem overly specific. Can you eat 2 fruits? What happens if an object eats a fruit? How does a fruit transfer when someone dies? He refuses to answer fully, but he pins down just enough constraints that when Blackbeard steals Whitebeard's power, or when smiles show up, or when Nika is revealed, the rules were there. We just treated them as trivia. And notice the pattern of what he won't touch. Ask about the D initial, hard dodge. Ask if One Piece is the friends we made along the way, immediate, emphatic, no. Ask about the Void Century, Joy Boy, Laugh Tale. He either lies, jokes, or swerves. But ask about the exact length of a fishman's lifespan, or the precise geography of the Calm Belt, and suddenly he's a tax accountant. Hyper-specific, over-detailed. That asymmetry is the tell. He's protecting a pre-existing plan while happily filling in safe blanks. The wild part is how fans only realise this retroactively. Huge reveal drops and then the community sprints back through decades of SBS, finds a throwaway gag from volume 30 and goes, "Wait, he told us." That only works if the seed was actually there on paper from the start. Otherwise we're just pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in toast. So here's the challenge. If the joke Q&A is this calculated, what do you think is happening in the actual story structure? Because next, we need to zoom out and look at how entire arcs mirror each other as part of the same long game. So if the SBS jokes are that calculated, I need you to zoom out with me for a second, because the real insanity is in the arc layout. Oda didn't just plan reveals, he planned the entire series as a mirror. East Blue is the demo, the New World is the remaster. Here's the thing, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Romance Dawn is this scrappy boy sets sail prototype. Punk Hazard is the same skeleton with the difficulty slider broken off. Mysterious government-adjacent scientist? Check. Weird island with extreme climates? Check. A kidnap kid plot turning into a massive conspiracy that drags us into the next saga? Also check. It's not repetition. It's an intentional echo with the stakes dialed up from small C to grand C. Arlong Park to Fishman Island is the most on-the-nose example. In East Blue, Nami's hometown is crushed under one racist fishman tyrant. In the New World, we go underwater and discover that exact oppression is just one tile in a centuries-long species trauma rooted in the Void Century. Same emotional core. A girl crying over a map, begging for help. Same image of Luffy walking forward while everyone else collapses. But now the villain's ideology is plugged into global slavery, celestial dragons, and inherited hatred. You don't get that clean escalation unless the author knew from Arlong that he was writing the prequel to Fishman Island. Alabasta and Dressrosa? Same category. Desert Kingdom versus Toy-filled Colosseum Nightmare. But structurally they rhyme. A warlord embedded in a monarchy, weaponizing public perception, using underground networks, turning the hero into a supposed enemy of the state. Luffy marching through a city to punch a smiling tyrant off a building is not a coincidence. It's the same track remixed with new instruments. Baroque works upgraded to the Don Quixote family, local rebellion upgraded to a world government embarrassment. Even Drum Island to Wano has this quiet reflection. A closed-off winter nation with a medical crisis, ruled by a petty, self-serving monarch. Then later, a closed-off samurai nation with a culture and resource crisis, ruled by a sadistic puppet shogun under an emperor. Chopper's dream to become a doctor who can cure any disease scales into Marco trying to heal an entire country's generational rot. Same beats, bigger canvas. And Oda keeps tagging these parallels with visual callbacks so blatant the community still calls them coincidence. Luffy putting his hat on Nami at Arlong Park, then on Rebecca's head in Dressrosa. The slow, silent walk to the final fight at Arlong Park, Alabasta, Enies Lobby, then echoed in Dressrosa and Wano. The flag moment, declaring war on Arlong's symbol, then literally burning the world government's flag at Enies Lobby, then smashing Kaido's and Big Mom's emblems off Onigashima. It's the same emotional grammar, spoken louder. This is not a sin. This is not lazy writing. This is pre-writing on a structural level. You only get this kind of controlled escalation if you've mapped Kid C and Adult C as two halves of the same sentence before Chapter 1. And if arcs are mirrored this precisely, we need to ask, what else is mirrored? Because next, we're going to talk about how characters themselves are built as reflections. Luffy, Roger, and a few others Oda has been quietly pairing for decades. So when I say arcs are mirrored, I'm not just talking about islands sharing floor plans. I'm talking about people. About Oda literally copy-pasting souls across generations and then tweaking the variables to tell you who's inheriting what role decades before he confirms it. Luffy and Roger are the obvious case, but I need you to slow down and actually look at how structural this is. Both are grinning idiots on the surface, sure, but they're also the guy who laughs at the treasure at the end of the world, the guy who recruits absolute weirdos and then treats them as the most natural crew in existence, the guy whose response to a rigged system is, cool, I'll break it. That's not coincidence, that's role design. Here's the thing, we met Luffy first. For years he was just our chaotic rubber protagonist, and Roger was a mustache on a scaffold. Then Oda starts rolling out flashbacks. Oden, Rayleigh, Roger's last journey. Suddenly you realise Luffy has been walking Roger's exact narrative skeleton for a decade. The laughing at the One Piece reveal doesn't just retroactively reframe Roger. It turns every moment Luffy laughed in the face of the world order into long-term foreshadowing of that scene. And Oda doesn't stop with the Golden Boy. He runs the same echo trick horizontally. Garp versus Luffy is generational dissonance built on the same core. Both are idiots of terrifying competence who punch dragons in the face and refuse promotions. One just married himself to the state, the other to freedom. Ace Sabo Luffy? That's a three-way prism of the same inherited will: the martyr, the revolutionary, the pirate. You can watch Oda distribute Roger's era-changing energy across those three kids, and then spend 20 years recombining it. Kid and Law are the same pattern at a different zoom level. They're not random rivals, they're Roger-era contemporaries in cosplay. Kid is the brutal, headline-chasing monster the world thinks Roger was. Law is the schemer with a tragic past and secret objective. Your Whitebeard/Rocks hybrid slotted neatly into the worst generation. And then there's Blackbeard, the dark Luffy. Same opportunism, same bet it all on this one stupid dream energy. Same willingness to pick up disasters as crewmates. The difference is moral, not structural. From a writing perspective, Oda built them on the same chassis, then flipped the alignment switch. This is not a sin. This is not lazy copying. This is intentional echoing as a foreshadowing engine. When Oda finally shows you more Roger in flashbacks, he's not improvising, he's retroactively locking in parallels that were already baked into Luffy's behavior. The flashback isn't a new idea, it's a receipt, and he's petty about it too. Vivi and Shirahoshi are princesses whose personal courage collides with world-scale politics, one in the desert and one under the sea, both tied to ancient weapon discourse. Hiyori's courtesan mask over trauma bounces off Nami's survival tactics and Robin's academic stoicism. These minor echoes tell you the inherited narrative isn't just about 1D. It's a tapestry of roles being handed down across the entire cast, which raises the next problem. If individual characters are echoing each other this hard, what about entire factions? If Luffy and Roger are mirrors, what about Marines, pirates, and revolutionaries as whole systems? Because the more you dig, the more it looks like Oda balanced those three forces from Chapter 1, and we need to talk about how that was planned in advance. So when you hear three great powers, your brain probably jumps to Marineford infographics and wiki diagrams. But listen to me, that triangle is already sitting in Chapter 1. Pirates, Marines, and a missing third point that the story bends around before the word revolutionary is ever spoken. Early on, the series hammers this stabilizing triangle. We get the Marines as the state's fist, the Seven Warlords as government-licensed pirates, and the Yonko as the untouchable emperors holding territory together through mutually assured chaos. That's not random flavor. That's a deliberately balanced equation: legal force, sanctioned crime, and independent monsters. The community treats it as world-building garnish, but structurally it's the author drawing a power map he's going to spend 1,000 chapters breaking. Here's the thing, the world is already unstable the moment Roger declares the Great Pirate Era. If piracy is exploding on a global scale, then pure marine suppression shouldn't work, and yet the seas haven't fully collapsed. That's your first clue there's an unseen variable. A hidden force is siphoning tension away from a total meltdown, and narratively, that's the Revolutionary Army. They're the term missing from the equation, the pressure valve that explains why the powder keg hasn't already gone off. And Oda seeds that counterforce and catalyst long before Dragon gets a name. In Chapter 1, Garp's Marines are already portrayed as both necessary and compromised. We hear about the Age of Pirates as a historical shift, not a random spike. Then in Loguetown, Dragon walks in through a storm, stops Smoker, saves Luffy, and leaves. No exposition, no info dump, just a visual thesis statement. There exists a player who can casually override a Marine captain and a future Yonko without being part of either category. That's not improvisation, that's pre-writing. I need you to notice how much is just name-dropped and shelved. The Seven Warlords system is explained in East Blue and early Grand Line, long before we meet half of them. Bonko is whispered as a title way before Shanks and Whitebeard's political weight is actually dramatized. Dragon is called the world's worst criminal years before we see a single revolutionary base. Those aren't random cool nouns. Those are labelled folders in a filing cabinet Oda already stocked. Fast forward to the fall of the Warlords. The world government abolishes a pillar of the three great powers, and instantly Cross-Guild appears, Yonko seats reshuffle, and the revolutionary army escalates at the reverie. Fans treat this as wild chaos, but if you read it as the author solving for X in a long-term equation, the pattern is almost boringly clean. Remove state-backed pirates, and you must increase independent pirate power and revolutionary pressure to keep the Great Pirate Era moving toward Luffy's promised dawn. This is not a sin. This is not Oda throwing darts at a board. This is intentional storytelling, where every shock is a pre-drawn line snapping into place. And we need to talk about how even the geography, the Grand Line, the Red Line, the Calm Belts is rigged to enforce that balance before a single faction moves. So when I say the map is evidence, I'm not being poetic, I'm being dead literal. The planet's UI is hard-coded to Oda's outline. The Grand Line, the Red Line, the Calm Belts, that's not just flavor text, that's a progression system. Here's the thing, the Grand Line is a story-level skill tree. You can't free roam. You're forced into a route. The segmented seas, the insane weather, the log pose mechanics, that's a designer saying, you will experience this escalation in this order. You start with Reverse Mountain, then Paradise, then the New World. Each segment is a tier of difficulty, a new category of political and mythological information unlocked. Crocodile and Alabaster for ancient weapons, Skypiea for Sky Islands and Poneglyphs. Eni's lobby for the world government's true face. This is not random island roulette. This is an intentional gating of law and power. And the log pose is the smoking gun. In universe, it's a navigational tool. In terms of writing, it's a leash. It says no. You can't just sail straight to Raftel because you're curious and overleveled. Sit down. Do your arcs. That's pre-writing behavior. The author already knows what information has to be in place before you're allowed to approach the endgame, so he bakes that pacing into the physics of magnetism. Now, zoom out. The Red Line and the Calm Belts are not just cool names on a map. They are literal walls, 4 oceans artificially separated. They calm belts full of sea kings that make casual crossing impossible. One giant continent choking the planet, forcing everyone through narrow choke points. Reverse Mountain, Maria Jui, Fishman Island. That physical fragmentation mirrors the social and political fragmentation Oda keeps hammering. North, south, east, west, blue. Nobles and trash, sky people, fishmen, Tenryobito, because the world is carved into categories and told they can't mix. Listen to me. When an author builds a planet where unity is mechanically disallowed, that's foreshadowing. The geography is screaming the theme at you, which is why fans have been correctly obsessed with the endgame theories about destroying or altering the Red Line or raising sea levels. Fishman Island's prophecy of destruction. Madame Chiali's vision of Luffy wrecking the place. Whitebeard at Marineford literally saying, when someone finds the One Piece, the world will be turned upside down. That is not metaphor when the only thing holding the seas apart is a giant rock wall. We need to talk about visuals too. Early maps show the Red Line as a perfect, unnatural ring. Reverse Mountain and Fishman Island sit exactly where a future breach would unify all 4 blues into one sea. Oda keeps drawing circles, dawns on horizons, people dreaming of a world where we can all live under the same sky. From Arlong Park's racism to Fishman Island's discrimination to the Reverie's failed diplomacy, the story keeps staging failed attempts at unification in the shadow of that wall. I need you to see the difference here. This isn't coincidence we're pattern-seeking monkeying into meaning. This is a puzzle box where the final move, break the ring, flood the map, reveal the ancient kingdom's true design, only works if the end state was locked in when the first map was drawn. If the world is a lock, someone had to design the key. And in the next section, we're going to talk about the ancient kingdom as that hidden player, the protagonist nation Oda, wrote first and has been letting you glimpse in pieces for 27 years. If the world is a lock, the ancient kingdom is the original blueprint. And here's the thing, That blueprint has been the invisible protagonist of One Piece from chapter 1. We know almost nothing, right? That's the meme. But line it up. A nation with technology so advanced that even Vegapunk is basically doing archaeology. A kingdom that opposed the 20 monarchs who became the Celestial Dragons. A culture tied to the D, clan to Poneglyphs to a promise from someone called Joy Boy. And every time Oda gives you a sliver of their ideology, it screams the same themes: freedom over control, unification over segregation, inherited will over hereditary rule. Now, I need you to notice how he teaches you that without ever doing the lore dump PowerPoint. He runs simulations. Skypiea is the ancient kingdom versus world government conflict in miniature. You have a sky civilization built on forgotten history, a persecuted native population, a god king enforcing divine rule, and a ruin in the jungle that literally contains the word history carved in stone. Robin reading that poneglyph under the giant jack is not random flavor text, it's the ancient kingdom's ghost tapping the glass. Fishman Island, same parable, different filter. Every system racism. A dream of living under the same sun. A promise tied to Joy Boy and Noah. An ancient weapon sleeping right below the royal castle. The entire arc is a case study in how the world reacts when an oppressed group gets close to the ancient kingdom's original dream of equality. Wano repeats it again. Closed borders, state-controlled history, a hidden poneglyph, and a lost alliance with Joy Boy's crew. Ohara is just the prologue where the scholars get executed for daring to read the protagonist's diary. This is not a sin, this is not lazy repetition. This is Oda using every arc about oppression, racism, or erased history as foreshadowing parables. Each one is a test case of what happens when the ancient kingdom's ideas brush against the world government's immune system. Sometimes it's a buster call. Sometimes it's a god descending on a tiny island with a lightning bolt. And sitting at the center of all of this are the ancient weapons and Joy Boy. Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus are not random superweapons. They're infrastructure from that lost civilization. Joy Boy isn't just a funny guy with a bad apology letter. He's the narrative stand-in for the kingdom's will. Oda has been reconstructing their ideology and downfall through scattered hints, cover stories, throwaway lines, instead of a single exposition chapter, because the emotional payoff depends on you feeling the absence first. Listen to me. You don't spend 27 years making readers cry over burned books, sunken cities, and forbidden research unless you already know exactly what those books say. The weight on lost history, on the will of D, on inherited dreams only works if the author has the full script of the Void Century in a drawer. Otherwise, it collapses into vibes and coincidence, and the community would have smelled that immediately. We need to zoom back down next. Because if the ancient kingdom is the invisible main character, then every Straw Hat dream is a supporting arc. So how much of Luffy's crew was engineered from day one to intersect with this Ghost Nation's unfinished story? But when I say every Straw Hat dream is a supporting arc to the ancient kingdom, I'm not being poetic. I'm being annoyingly literal. Listen to me. These aren't just goals. They're coordinates. They're Oda quietly pinning markers on the final world map 25 years early. Run them down. Luffy wants to be Pirate King. Oro wants to be the world's greatest swordsman. Nami wants to draw a complete map of the world. Usopp wants to be a brave warrior of the sea. Sanji wants to find the All Blue. But Chopper wants to cure any disease. Robin wants to uncover the true history. Frankie wants to build a ship that sails to the end. Brook wants to reunite with Laboon. Inbi wants true coexistence between fishmen and humans. On the surface, that's a fun D&D party. Underneath, that's a geopolitical checklist. Here's the thing. Nami's dream literally cannot be fulfilled in the current world structure. You cannot map the whole world when the red line physically walls off oceans, when the Calm Belt is a Sea King-infested moat, when the government actively censors islands off the record. A dream requires unification. It requires the seas to be fully accessible, which implies either the destruction of the red line, the reconfiguration of the Grand Line, or both. That's not headcanon. That's basic cartography. The moment Nami says a map of the entire world, Oda is quietly promising you a future where the current borders are gone. Now stack Sanji, Chopper and Jinbe on top of that, all blue, is a single ocean where fish from every sea coexist. Chopper's cure any disease is meaningless unless he can actually reach every population. Jinbe's coexistence dream is impossible while Fishman Island is literally under the red line, in a bubble, segregated by design. Different dreams, same structural problem. The world must be rearranged. These must mix, cultures must integrate, information and medicine must flow. That is exactly the post-revolution order the ancient kingdom seems to have been building before the 20 kings nuked it out of history. This is not a sin. This is not Oda stumbled into good theming. This is intentional writing. He's using character dreams as foreshadowing for tectonic world events. And then there's Robin. Robin is the most on-the-nose example in the entire story. She doesn't just want knowledge in a vague shonen protagonist way. Her dream is, read the Poneglyphs and uncover the Void Sentry. She is structurally the exposition engine. When she joins at Whiskey Peak and then Alabasta, Oda is literally bolting the ancient kingdom decoder ring onto Luffy's ship. He cannot resolve Luffy's dream without triggering hers, because Pirate King is bound up with Laugh-Tale, and Laugh-Tale is bound up with the true history. And we need to talk about how Frankie and Brook quietly close the loop. Frankie's dream is to build a ship that sails to the end of the world. That's not a metaphor. That's a physical endpoint, Laugh-Tale, or whatever comes after the red line falls. Brook's reunion with Laboon hardlocks Reverse Mountain into the finale geography. These are not random emotional payoffs. They're spatial anchors. I need you to notice what that means. Even the ship they sail on, the Thousand Sunny, stops being just a vehicle and starts reading as a meta-architected tool built to survive the exact cataclysm these dreams demand. And we're not done with that, because Frankie's blueprints, yeah, those might be the most literal proof that Oda pre-wrote the endgame years before the Sunny ever touched water. And Frankie's blueprints are the smoking gun, but the Sunny itself is the body on the floor. I need you to really sit with that, because the moment the crew upgrades from the Going Merry to the Thousand Sunny, Oda is quietly telling you, we're in a different category of story now. The Merry is an East Blue fairy tale. It's sentimental, fragile, powered by friendship and duct tape. It's a ship that literally cannot survive the Grand Line's escalation. And that's the point. Its death is a eulogy for that early, smaller version of One Piece. The Sunny, though. The Sunny is a war machine wrapped in a cute lion figurehead. It's explicitly introduced as a vessel that can sail to the end of the world. That's not cozy shipwright banter. That's the author planting a mission statement. The Merry is an East Blue fairy tale. It's sentimental, fragile, powered by friendship and duct tape. It's a ship that literally cannot survive the Grand Line's escalation. And that's the point. Its death is a eulogy for that early, smaller version of One Piece. The Sunny, though? The Sunny is a war machine wrapped in a cute lion figurehead. It's explicitly introduced as a vessel that can sail to the end of the world. That's not cozy shipwright banter. That's the author planting a mission statement. Here's the thing. The Sunny's arsenal is absurd. Coup de Burst is not just a fun rocket jump. It's a controlled, repeatable method of three-dimensional traversal. Oja dock system. You've got a mini submarine, a waver, a tank, a carpentry workshop, a medical bay on rails. The ship can go underwater, launch aircraft, mass-produce solar energy, harvest sunlight and wind more efficiently. At some point you stop going, wow, neat toy, and you start going, okay, what hellscape did this man pre-write that requires all of this just to exist there? Fans in the community often treat these as gags or merchandising opportunities. This is normal. This is fine. But from a writing perspective, every single one of those features is a preloaded answer to a question we haven't fully seen yet. Extreme currents, coup de burst. Impassable storms, dock system with modular vehicles. Pressure and darkness, Mini Merry and Shark submerge. When you stack them, The final sea around Laughtail stops being a vague mystery and starts reading as a hostile, multi-layered environment that demands a Swiss Army ship to survive. And then you remember who built it. Frankie isn't just a goofy cyborg. He's Tom's disciple, heir to the man who built the Oro Jackson and was trusted with Pluton's blueprints. Water 7's entire shipwright culture is framed around the idea that a ship can change the world as much as any ancient weapon. That's not random world building, that's Oda establishing a precedent. Ships are devices. Bets. Ships are weapons. Ships are history machines. So when Frankie burns Pluton's plans and instead pours that inherited genius into the Sunny, the foreshadowing is brutal. The weapon that will actually reach the truth of the Void Century is not Pluton. It's already sailing. Listen to me. That means Sunny is almost certainly spec'd for conditions we haven't even had named yet. Hypererratic magnetism beyond log poses, vertical currents into the upper atmosphere, maybe even debris fields or weather patterns tied to the moon and those ancient sky civilizations the story keeps winking at. You don't give your protagonist a ship that can jump, dive, glide, self-sustain and reconfigure unless you already have a conceptual map of a final ocean that demands every single function. And if even the boat is pre-written foreshadowing, we need to talk about the last big wild card on that sea, Blackbeard. Because his body, his crew, his fruit collection, every part of him screams planned final boss in exactly the same terrifying, documented way. And the community kind of treated him as a meme for years. Fat guy in a vest, goofy laugh, gets clowned by Bellamy's goons and eats pies. But listen to me. That first giant encounter is Oda quietly putting the final boss on stage and daring you not to notice. Look at how it's framed. Luffy and Zoro at the bar, Blackbeard ranting about dreams while the crowd mocks them. People's dreams never end. On a surface read, he's this weird inspirational hobo echoing Luffy's ethos. Then the panel flip. He, Oda, literally cuts the page to tell you, in big neon letters, this man is both pathetic and terrifying. Ally-coded and enemy-coded. A scene only really snaps into focus once you know he's the future Yonko who will hunt devil fruits, topple emperors, and race Luffy to the final island. Here's the thing. None of that works as retrofitting. That's not, oh, Oda decided later that guy was important. The body with a unique structure is mentioned in Drum. His failure to sleep, the way he tanks damage that should kill him, and yet feels pain more intensely. You don't build a character around a biology glitch on a whim. You do that because you've already planned this man will break the one fruit rule and weaponize the system itself. And that's the philosophical inversion. Luffy's relationship to devil fruits is almost incidental. He eats one on a dare and spends the rest of the series proving his will matters more than his power category. Blackbeard is obsessed. He studies fruits, hunts them, builds an entire pirate startup around vertical integration of supernatural assets. Luffy breaks into Eni's lobby to save a friend. Teach breaks into impel down to farm an army. Luffy refuses to work with the world government even temporarily. Teach hands the Marines Whitebeard's corpse in exchange for legitimacy. Same ocean, opposite operating systems. I need you to notice how structural that opposition is. Luffy's crew is a found family of broken people whose dreams expand outward. Cure all disease, draw a map of the world, find the all blue. Blackbeard's crew is a draft of monsters and state failures. Ex-level 6 prisoners, corrupted versions of archetypes, people whose dreams contract down to power and survival. One ship is the Sunny, one ship is the Saber of Zebek. Even the names are foreshadowing essays, because Teach isn't just a villain. He's a D. That initial ties him into the same inherited will conversation as Luffy, Roger, Law. But where Luffy inherits Joy Boy's mantle as a promise to liberate others, Teach is what happens when that same explosive will is pointed inward. Inherited will without empathy becomes corrupted dream. The D legacy turned into a personal investment portfolio, and Oda routes the whole world through him. Ace's capture only happens because Teach needs a bargaining chip. Marineford only happens because Teach hands that chip to the Marines, then steals Whitebeard's power in the chaos. The Yonko reshuffle, the post-time skip power map, even the race for road poneglyphs, all of it has Teach's fingerprints. This is not a background opportunist. This is a pre-written hinge, which means when fans tell me Blackbeard is just another antagonist, I feel my soul leaving my body. This is not a sin, this is normal, we're all pattern-seeking monkeys staring at panels on a screen. But Oda documented a dark mirror to Luffy, years before Gear 5, before Laugh Tale, before Emu. And with Blackbeard locked in as the anti-Luffy, we need to talk about the final trick in Oda's toolbox, how he uses misdirection itself as foreshadowing. Because the last layer of this blueprint isn't just what he planned, it's how he hides it from you in plain sight. So here's the thing, Oda's last trick isn't a specific character or reveal. It's a system. It's a way of writing that weaponizes your own attention span against you. Oda's real foreshadowing is boring on purpose. It lives in background lore, in some old guy mumbling about a century erased from history. To keep you from staring at that too long, he builds this giant misdirection toolkit. Side gags, joke characters, red herring villains, and surface level mysteries that feel urgent but are structurally disposable. You know this experience. A new arc drops and the community immediately starts arguing about power levels, or whether two characters are secretly in love, or if this mid-tier villain is going to be the next crocodile. Meanwhile, the actually important thing is a throwaway line about the Void Century, or a D name quietly slipped into a government report. We chase the fireworks while the real setup walks past us in a grey hoodie. Alabasta is an early example. Everyone was obsessed with Mr. Pokago, Zero, with the who is crocodile really conversation, with how strong the warlords were. This is not a sin, this is normal. But in the background, you have poneglyphs introduced, an ancient weapon casually named, and Robin reading history in a language the world government has criminalized. The fandom latched onto the cool Sandman. The story was quietly onboarding you into the Void Century plotline that will matter for 3 decades. Skypiea does the same thing. Fans spent years arguing over an L's power level, debating whether he'd show up in the final war, while the real payload was in the lore dump, the Great Bell, the map of the world on the Poneglyph, the confirmation that the empty century is literally carved into stone. We turned into pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in Enal's earlobes, while Oda was busy pinning the endgame to the sky. And notice how he calibrates which mysteries resolve fast. Devil fruit gimmicks? Often explained within the same arc. A new Haki trick? Demonstrated, named, categorized. You feel smart because you figured it out. Then the truly central categories. Void Century, D, Emu, Laugh Tale. Just simmer. For years. Or decades. He is training you to misprioritize clues. You learn unconsciously that the solvable puzzles are the ones that don't matter long term. Listen to me. This does not happen by accident. This is not random trolling. This is an intentional pacing and retention strategy. By overloading each arc with noise, he can hide the signal in plain sight, then cash it out later in a way that feels both shocking and retrospectively obvious. You were told, you just didn't file it correctly, and I need you to understand what that implies. You cannot pull that off unless the plan was there from the start. You can't thread 27 years of fake mysteries around a moving target, which means if we map enough of these misdirection shells, we can start reverse engineering the artillery underneath. So in the next chunk, we're going to do something stupid. We're going to take all these patterns and try to reconstruct the ending outline Oda wrote before Chapter 1 and see how much of the blueprint we can drag into the light. So here's where we zoom out and do the stupid thing. We're not just pointing at cool foreshadowing anymore. We're basically doing forensic reconstruction on the outline Oda had before Chapter 1. I need you to picture a document on his desk with 3 lines at the top. Laugh Tale, Joy Boy, and a world that crushes freedom. Everything we've talked about is debris from that explosion. Here's the thing. You can feel the difference between an author stumbling toward an ending and an author walking toward a destination they already saw. The end goal is fixed. Reach Laugh Tale, reveal the One Piece, expose the Void Century. The core myth is fixed. Joy Boy failed. The world government buried it. The will of D keeps crawling back. Emotional thesis is fixed. Freedom versus control. Inherited will versus institutional amnesia. What changes is the route, not the target. That's the macro planning versus micro improve line. Macro is the One Piece is a real physical treasure tied to a historical crime. That's why Roger and Whitebeard are talking about it with that very specific mix of awe and laughter 20 years apart. Macro is the Void Century and ancient weapons are the original sin. That's why Poneglyphs, Pluton and the Ohara flashback are seeded before chapter 400. Micro is, we'll reveal one weapon in Alabasta, another in Water 7, and keep Uranus in a mystery box for 15 years because pacing is hard and this is normal. When you list the non-negotiables, it stops feeling coincidental. The will of D shows up early as this weird naming quirk, then slowly hardens into bloodline of rebellion. Joy Boy is a throwaway apology on a poneglyph, then a tragic promise that structurally mirrors Luffy's vow to Laboon. The Grand Line itself is a story funnel. Reverse Mountain to Raftel is literally a track you can only run once, which is exactly what you design if you already knew the final island and needed a 27-year delivery system. And those pillars are not floating in a void. They're wired into all the foreshadowing categories we've hit. Dialogue hints, Shanks betting everything on that fruit, Whitebeard warning that when someone finds the One Piece, the world will turn upside down, Roger laughing at the final island, world-building seeds, reverie being teased way before it becomes the Aimu stage, poneglyphs sitting in the background as blue USB sticks of war crimes, visual motifs, suns, chains, smiles, crowns, drawn over and over until Gear 5 and Nika snap them into focus. Listen to me, this is not retroactive fanfiction. We have time-stamped receipts, early SBS answers where Oda ducks D, questions with the confidence of a man who already knows the slide he'll show you in 2025. Cover stories that later become full arcs, pre-time skip panels that only make sense post-Wano, unless your assumption is he planned it instead of he's a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. And this level of planning matters. It's why the payoffs feel inevitable instead of RNG. It's why you reread Skypiea after Wano and suddenly it's a rehearsal for the endgame, not a detour. And you realise you've been reading two stories at once. The one on the page and the one in Oda's binder. So from here on, we're done asking whether Oda planned it. We need to ask what that planning does to the ending, to your rereads, and to every long-form story you touch after this. Because once you see the puzzle box, you can't unsee it. And in the next section, we're going to pry the lid all the way open. So here's where I need you to pause and uninstall one of the laziest takes in the community. Manga authors don't really know their endings. They just wing it. That sentence does not survive contact with the receipts we've just gone through. It's comforting, sure. It makes every series feel improv jazz. But for One Piece, it's fantasy. Oda has said he decided the final panel before serialization, not a vague vibe where Luffy smiles. A specific image he's been steering toward for 27 years. That's not vibes. That's architecture. And here's the thing, once you accept that, the entire conversation shifts from does he know the ending to how tightly is the route locked? Because no, this doesn't mean every gag, every cover story, every SBS joke was scripted in 1997. This is not a sin, this is normal. Structure can be fixed while details stay flexible. The destination is non-negotiable. Who reaches Laugh Tale? What the One Piece is? What the Void Century truth is? What happens to the world government? The route is where Oda plays. Which island comes first? Which ally gets folded into which war? Which joke about rubber and drums secretly doubles as Nika foreshadowing? Look at the long-term setups that only make sense if the endpoint was pre-decided. The Roger flashback is held until post-Marineford, when the world has seen a failed pirate king and needs the real thesis statement. Whitebeard's One Piece is real speech is not random old man hype. It's a hard confirmation the treasure exists, so the Final Saga can't cop out with "the journey was the real treasure" nonsense. The slow drip of Joy Boy and Nika, from a throwaway Poneglyph apology on Fishman Island to Wano's full myth dump, only works if the payoff image of the sun god was sitting in the folder from day one. And thematically, the ending has been locked since East Blue. Freedom versus oppression is baked into Arlong Park and Loguetown. Inherited will versus erasure is Ohara, the Will of D, the Void Century, all pointing straight at Imu and the Celestial Dragons trying to delete history itself. Laughter versus despair is Roger at his execution, Luffy at his, Buggy hamming it up while the world burns. We're not discovering new themes in the Final Saga, we're watching the original thesis cash its check. But does that kill surprise? No, it just changes the category of surprise. Oda's whole trick is misdirection and comedic camouflage. He hides structural beams inside fart jokes and SBS drawings, so the path feels chaotic even when the endpoint is set. You knew Luffy would fight a world tyrant someday. You did not know that Tyrant would be a shadow monarch, sitting on an empty throne, casually erasing islands from maps while a pattern-seeking monkey in your brain is still busy seeing Jesus in Skypiea's cloud formations. What's left then if the outline is done? The blanks, not the blueprint, the full Void Century narrative, the exact nature of the dawn, the final state of each Straw Hat's dream, how the world order reshapes after the throne falls. These are questions of execution, not direction. The line is drawn, we're watching how he inks it. And if that's true, then rereading isn't just nostalgia, it's forensic work. It's the only way to see the story Oda hid under the weekly cliffhangers, which means in the next section, we're going to treat One Piece as a finished puzzle and see what picture appears when you stop reading it in order. So if the first read is you getting dragged through weekly cliffhangers, the reread is you walking back through the crime scene with a flashlight. You're not following the plot anymore. You're profiling the author. You're asking, where did Oda hide the outline? Once you accept that he pre-wrote the endgame, a reread stops being, oh yeah, I remember this fight, and turns into, okay, what future decision was already locked in here? Skypiea stops being the arc everyone in the community swore was skippable and becomes a Void Century dress rehearsal. The Golden Bell, the Forgotten Kingdom in the sky, the ancient weapon name-dropped in passing, the god who fell from grace, the sun motifs baked into every page. On a reread, that's not random flavor. That's Oda quietly running the Joy Boy / Nika / ancient weapon pipeline. Thriller Bark does the same thing. First time through, it's a Halloween filler vacation with a giant zombie and a talking skeleton. Second time, you realize it's a test run for everything Wano and Egghead are doing with souls, shadows, and stolen bodies. Mariah ripping shadows out of people. Kuma's offer to take Luffy's pain. The idea that a person can be disassembled into parts and repurposed by the world government. That's not just horror gags. That is a category of foreshadowing for how this world treats human beings as assets. And then Sabaudi. On first read, it's oh no, we got stomped. On reread, it's the thesis statement for the government's rot. A Celestial Dragons as walking systemic violence. Slavery as an open secret. Kizaru's bored apathy. Kuma's mysterious mercy. Every panel is Oda underlining, this is the machine the endgame has to break. Now zoom in on characters. Robin on a reread is unbearable in the best way. Every time she sees a poneglyph, every tiny shift in her face is a woman who already knows the shape of the Void Century and is choosing not to say it out loud because the story isn't allowed to reveal it yet. Luffy's weirdly specific lines about freedom and choosing where to die. After Gear 5 and Nika, those aren't shonen protagonist noises. That's the sun god endgame leaking through the mask. Usopp's lies turn into a roadmap. You can literally track the writing. The more absurd the lie, the more nervous you should be that Oda has already planned a payoff. Sanji's obsession with All Blue. On reread, with the red line, reverse mountain, and the endgame geography in your head, That dream sounds a lot less vague and a lot more structurally inevitable. And visually, once you know to look, it's disgusting. Recurring sun imagery, characters framed against the sky when their freedom is on the line, framed against the sea when their fate is tied to history, early silhouettes that later snap perfectly onto revealed designs. Cover stories quietly introducing factions that stroll into the main plot hundreds of chapters later. You start to feel less like a reader and more like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast, and then Oda proves you right anyway. I need you to stop speedrunning. Pause on panels every single week. Check chapter titles, track when certain words, dawn, inherited will, empty throne, show up. Treat it as a puzzle the author intentionally left for fans who care enough to dig. Here's the thing, this is not a sin. This is normal for long-form storytelling done at this level. We need to stop pretending it's magic and start treating it as craft. And if you're already composing the comment, I don't have time to reread 1,000 chapters, this is fine. You don't need a full reread. Hit the pressure points. Loguetown, Skypiea, Eni's Lobby, Sabeda, Marineford, Dressrosa, Wholecake, Wano, or use good summaries and focus on specific threads. The sun motifs, the ancient weapons, the revolutionaries. The practical challenge is simple. Pick one thread and follow it backwards. Because once you see how planned this all is, it doesn't just change how you read One Piece. It rewires how you look at any long-running series. In the next section, I want to zoom out from Oda and talk about how to watch stories differently once you realize the ending might already exist before page 1. So here's the thesis, plain and kind of uncomfortable. This isn't just Oda is a genius, wow crazy panels. What you've been watching for 27 years is a free masterclass in how to build long-form narratives that feel both surprising and inevitable. If you walk away only saying he planned everything and not what did he actually do, you're wasting tuition. Because here's the thing, Oda is not doing magic. He's doing very boring, very disciplined storytelling work. Plant early, pay off late. Had big setups inside jokes, so they slide past the pattern-seeking monkey in your brain that sees Jesus in toast but somehow missed Laboon being the emotional core of an entire Straw Hat. Keep the themes pointed in one direction even when the plot is zigzagging all over the ground line. And above everything else, know the ending image, even if the middle is a foggy nightmare. Look at his actual techniques. Running gags as delayed payoffs. Kenemone's My Torso Fell Off Again bit quietly training you for Wono's execution and dismemberment trauma. Background details as future hooks. Poneglyphs just sitting there as weird rocks before they become the spine of the Void Century. Side characters as test cases. Vivi and Alabaster as the prototype for every Kingdom in Crisis arc after. Parallel structures. Repeated execution scenes from Roger to Ace to whatever we're building toward now. Drilling the theme of inherited will so deep you feel it before you consciously notice it. Now, contrast that with sloppy plotting you've seen in other series. Retcons that rewrite characters with no groundwork. Mysteries raised for hype that never get answers. Twists that flat out contradict earlier scenes because the author changed their mind and hoped you wouldn't rewatch. This is not a sin. This is normal. This is how most commercial writing gets made under pressure. But you feel the difference. Those stories feel cheap because the payoff isn't anchored to an intentional setup. It's stapled on top of whatever was there. Oda's method is slower, but it's fair. He decided the final panel before chapter 1 and then drip-fed you symbols, jokes and side comments that all orbit that image. So if you're an aspiring writer, steal this. I need you to keep a future payoffs notebook. Design 1 or 2 symbols that can recur for decades. Write dialogue that works now but has a second meaning once the reveal drops. Decide your emotional ending before your plot ending. What do you want the reader to feel on the last page? And how can every earlier scene be a rehearsal for that? And to the rest of you, the audience, I'm going to be a little combative. You're not allowed to call something bad writing just because you didn't catch the setup. Before you slam a twist, ask, did the author plant this and I missed it? Or did they genuinely pull it out of nowhere? We need to get better at that distinction as a community. Because if One Piece can carry this much hidden structure for 27 years and still feel stupid and heartfelt and breezy, that's not an accident. That's the reason it hits so hard. And in the next section, I want to sit in that feeling and talk about what all this planning actually does to you emotionally when the end finally comes. But here's where I need to be a little rude to you, very gently. Because for years the default take has been, it's just a goofy pirate cartoon, or it's too long to be good. Or my personal favourite, Dome can't be that deep. And then you stack those memes next to a 27-year spreadsheet of intentional setups, visual motifs, and endgame pre-writing we just walked through. And suddenly those takes start to look less objective criticism and more, I didn't do the reading. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is normal. Most of us grew up treating long-running series as disposable content. You binge, you move on, you vaguely remember the guy with the hair, but One Piece refuses to let you be that kind of viewer. When an author introduces Poneglyphs, the Will of D, and a missing century before chapter 200, and then actually pays them off decades later, that isn't goofy pirate cartoon behaviour. That's I planned a generational puzzle box and trusted you to keep up behaviour. Here's the thing though, if you are still here, listening to some stranger on the internet diagram foreshadowing chains from Reverse Mountain to Wano, you are not the It's Mid crowd. You are already engaging with storytelling on a higher level. You are the pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Except in this case, the toast really does have a hidden Joy Boy silhouette burned into it. One Piece at its core is a trust fall. Oda assumes you'll remember a throwaway line from Whiskey Peak, when Robin's flower motif shows up again in Ohara. He assumes you'll clock that weird whale gag in East Blue and feel your chest cave in 400 chapters later when Brooke starts talking about Laboon. He assumes some part of you will carry the weight of promises made to Kuina, to Nami, to Vivi. That is rare, that is intentional. And when a story respects your memory and attention that much, something weird happens. You stop feeling like you're just consuming episodes. You start feeling like you're in on something with the author. Every time a payoff lands, it's not just oh cool twist, it's oh he remembered what I remembered. That's why this series has people sobbing over a boat, or a hat, or a Vivere card burning away on a tiny panel. So I need you to not undersell yourself here. If you can track the insane web of setups and payoffs in One Piece, you can handle any complicated novel, film, or dense long-form media that people pretend is too highbrow for shonen fans. You already have the muscles. You've been training them weekly for years. And crucially, Oda didn't plan all of this just to flex. The point of this pre-written endgame is that when we finally turn those last pages, your entire journey with the story snaps into focus. Your time, your attention, your emotional investment, none of it was wasted. It all mattered, which means the real question isn't, did he plan it? We've answered that. The question now is, what do you actually do with that as a fan from this point on? And that's where we're going next. So here's where we land. Oda outlined his ending before you ever met a rubber boy in a barrel. He seeded the world building with poneglyphs, D's, ancient weapons, reverie politics, all of it. He hid core themes in jokes, in SBS answers, in cover stories about a seagull on a coffee break. And then he spent 27 years cashing those checks with surgical, frankly terrifying discipline. This wasn't luck. This was a professional author running a long con on your heart. And here's the thing. Knowing that doesn't ruin One Piece. It doesn't spoil the magic. It upgrades it. Once you understand how intentional this is, every arc, every gag, every weird cover story suddenly moves into a new category in your brain. Potential evidence. That dumb joke about Kinemon and the dragon, weaponized trauma. Laboon's funny headbutting bit, a 400-chapter promise. You're not just reading a story, you're walking through a loaded minefield of foreshadowing. So what do you actually do with that? I need you to pick one thread, just one. Joy Boy, the D, ancient weapons, Imu, Usopp's lies, whatever haunts you at 3 a.m. when you're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Start at the beginning and track it. When does it appear? When does it evolve? When does Oda misdirect you on purpose? Don't just take my word for it. Go build your own case file and see how far the planning actually goes. And then bring it back here. We need to turn the comments into a collective crime board. Drop your favourite foreshadowing payoff, especially the ones I didn't touch. The obscure SBS line that blew up 10 years later. The panel you screenshotted in 2006 and only understood in Wano. If you've got an example that makes you go, there is no way he didn't plan this, I want it in writing. Let's see how much of Oda's blueprint this community can reconstruct from the outside. Meta time. If you want more of this level of obsessive weeks of my life gone breakdown, you have to actually signal it. This is not a sin. This is normal. You hit like, you sub, you comment, you throw this at that one friend who still says, nah, he's just winging it. Those are the receipts that tell me, yes, please keep sacrificing your sleep schedule to diagram fictional pirates. Without that, it is very hard to justify another 3-hour manifesto on, I don't know, Usopp's career as a pathological prophet. Because remember, we're still not done. Oda is still out there, quietly caching setups we haven't even recognized as setups yet. There are panels you have scrolled past that will only detonate in the final chapter. And when that happens, I want you to be able to point and go, I saw that, I knew what game he was playing. Oda planned everything. Your job now is to notice,